Get her out of that house. Adrian Valenti said at once, quietly. The way men like him said things they never had to repeat. 3 hours later, Sofia Romano stood in front of him, pale, trembling, wearing the same dress she had on when his men pulled her from Victor's mansion without a single warning, without a single explanation. She looked at him the way people look at someone they've already decided is going to hurt them. She wasn't wrong to think that. Not yet. If you love stories about revenge, secrets, and the moment, one truth changes everything. Subscribe to this channel. Follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Adrian Valenti had not slept in 31 hours. That was not unusual for him. Sleep required a certain degree of peace, and peace was something Adrian had not been able to afford in a very long time. Not since the night 3 years ago, when Victor Romano sent men to his father's restaurant and burned it to the ground with 2 people still inside. Not since the funeral where Adrian stood in the rain with dirt on his shoes and a promise clenched so tightly in his chest that it felt like a second heartbeat. He had promised himself he would take from Victor exactly what Victor had taken from him. Not money. Money could be replaced. Not territory. Territory shifted and changed like sand. He would take the one thing Victor Romano had built his entire public identity around, his beautiful, loyal, devoted wife. Sofia Romano was the only thing in Victor's world that appeared untouched by cruelty. She appeared at charity events in silk dresses. She gave speeches about community development with a grace that made reporters call her the conscience of a ruthless family. She had a smile that Victor paraded in front of cameras like a trophy. Look at what I have. Look at what I built. Look at the life no man could take from me. Adrian planned to take it. He planned to bring Sofia Romano into his world, let Victor know exactly where she was, and then make Victor watch while his most prized possession sat inside the walls of the Valenti estate. A message. A wound that wouldn't close. A reminder that nothing Victor owned was actually safe. That was the plan. That was what Adrian had told himself for 3 years. He had not planned on what happened when his men finally brought her inside. She was smaller than he expected. That was the first thought, and he hated himself for it, because it was not the thought of a man executing a plan. It was the thought of a man noticing a human being. Sofia Romano stood in the middle of his study, a room designed specifically to make people feel small with high ceilings and dark wood, and the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, and she did not look like a trophy. She looked like a woman who had been frightened before and had learned how to breathe through it. She wasn't crying. He had expected crying. Her hands were steady at her sides, though he could see from the way her fingers pressed against her thighs that steadiness was costing her something. She looked at him the way she might look at a wall she was about to walk through. "You're Adrian Valenti," she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was a woman identifying what she was dealing with the same way you identify the weather before you decide what coat to wear. "Yes," he said. "Then you've made a mistake," she said. He almost smiled. He didn't. "Have I?" "Not the kind you think." She met his eyes without flinching. "Whatever story Victor told you about me, whatever you believe I am to him, I need you to understand that you've just done something that is going to hurt you more than it hurts him." Sofia. He said her name the way you say a door handle, an object, a means to an end. "I've been planning this for 3 years. I don't make mistakes. Every man who's ever stood where you're standing has said something exactly like that," she answered, "and every single one of them was wrong." There was something in her voice, not fear, not even anger. Something older than both of those things, like a woman reciting a sentence she'd already lived through once and was exhausted to be living through again. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to Marco, the man who had been with him for 15 years, the man who had stood beside him at his father's grave and said nothing because there was nothing to say. "Put her in the East Wing," Adrian said. "Comfortable, nothing missing, nothing restricted. But she doesn't leave. Marco nodded. Adrian looked back at Sophia one final time. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not hatred, not despair, but something that looked almost like pity. That was the thing that stayed with him. He didn't understand it yet. He would. Victor Romano received the message at 11:47 in the evening. Adrian knew this because he had people inside Victor's compound. Careful, patient, invisible people who had been waiting 3 years for a moment exactly like this one. He knew Victor read the message 3 times. He knew Victor put down the glass of wine he'd been drinking and sat very still for almost 4 minutes. He knew Victor then called his head of security, a man named Dario Fitch, and said 6 words into the phone. "Find her. Tonight. No witnesses." Adrian read the report and felt something he recognized as satisfaction, though it tasted different than he'd imagined. Less like victory. More like the first step of a long walk through a corridor he hadn't fully seen yet. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and sat in his study and thought about what he was doing. He had taken a woman from her home. He had used her as a piece in a war she hadn't started. He had made her a prisoner to punish a man. He closed his eyes and told himself the same thing he'd been telling himself for 3 years. Victor Romano earned this. Victor Romano chose this when he burned that restaurant. Victor Romano chose this when he killed the people Adrian loved, and never lost a single night of sleep over it. The calculation was clean. He kept it clean. He went to bed. He did not sleep. At 6 in the morning, Sophia Romano was sitting at the small table near the east wing window when the woman who managed the house brought her breakfast. Magdalena, 62 years old, 30 years with the Valenti family, the kind of woman who had seen everything and volunteered nothing. Sophia said good morning. Magdalena said good morning back, set down the tray, and started to leave. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said. Magdalena paused. "How long do people usually stay here?" Sophia asked. "In this wing, in this situation." Magdalena was quiet for a moment. "That depends," she said finally. "On what?" "On what Mr. Valenti decides they are." Sophia nodded slowly. "What are the options?" The older woman turned and looked at her with eyes that had spent decades not revealing things. "There have been guests," she said, "and there have been variables." "Which am I?" "You're still being decided." Magdalena picked up a teacup that hadn't been touched and straightened it unnecessarily. "He had a meeting scheduled for this morning. He canceled it. That's not something he does." She left before Sophia could say anything else. Sophia sat alone with her breakfast and thought about what it meant that Adrian Valenti had canceled a meeting. She already knew exactly what it meant. It meant he was thinking about her, and that was something she had been both dreading and quietly, carefully, desperately hoping for. He came to see her at 9 o'clock. He didn't knock. Men like Adrian Valenti didn't knock on doors in their own houses, not because they were rude, but because it simply never occurred to them that a door might exist that they needed permission to open. He walked in the way he walked into every room in his life, like a man who had already decided what he was going to find and was simply confirming it. What he found instead was Sophia Romano sitting cross-legged on the floor with a notebook open in her lap. Writing. He stopped. "You have paper," he said. It came out flatter than he intended. She looked up without startling the way someone looks up when they already heard you coming. Magdalena was kind enough to bring some. "I hope that's all right." "What are you writing?" "Something I should have written a long time ago." She closed the notebook and set it face down on the floor beside her. "But I wasn't sure I'd live long enough for it to matter." He walked further into the room and sat down in the chair near the window, not because he needed to sit, but because standing over someone on the floor felt like a performance he wasn't interested in. "You think Victor would have killed you?" "I think Victor has been deciding whether to kill me for the past 2 years." She said it without drama, the way you state the weather or the time. "He hadn't made up his mind yet. The fact that you took me from his house probably just made it up for him." "That should frighten you more than it seems to." "It frightened me plenty before you showed up," Sophia said. I've had a lot of practice with being frightened. After a while, you either stop letting it control your decisions or you stop making decisions at all. Adrian looked at her carefully. He had imagined this many times. The moment he had Victor Romano's wife in front of him. He had imagined satisfaction. He had imagined seeing Victor's face in every piece of property he'd acquired, and finally having something to point to and say, "Look, I took this from you." He had imagined that this woman would be crying or furious or desperately trying to negotiate. He had not imagined this. A woman sitting on the floor writing something she didn't want him to see, telling him she'd been living in fear before he arrived and had simply adapted. "You're not what I expected," he said. "No," she agreed. "I'm generally not." "Victor describes you as—" "I know how Victor describes me," she interrupted, and for the first time something sharp moved behind her eyes. "I've heard it enough. The devoted wife, the gracious partner, the woman who made a good man look like a complete one." She breathed out slowly. "None of it is real. I think you already know that. I think that's why you're sitting down." He said nothing. "You planned this as a punishment," she said. "You wanted Victor to suffer. I understand that. Victor has done things that deserve every consequence coming to him." She paused. "But I am not his. I haven't been his in any meaningful way since before you planned any of this." "Then why stay?" The question came out before he'd decided to ask it. "If the marriage is what I'm beginning to think it is, why not leave?" Sophia looked at him for a long moment. "Because leaving requires that everyone you love survives the exit," she said quietly. And Victor made sure that wasn't guaranteed. The room was very still. Adrian leaned back in his chair and looked at the notebook on the floor and thought about a woman who spent years protecting someone from the same man he'd been trying to destroy. He thought about the 2 people who died in that restaurant fire. He thought about how many other things Victor Romano had burned that he didn't know about. "Tell me about the thing you can't leave behind," Adrian said. And Sophia Romano, who had not trusted anyone in years, made a decision that surprised even herself. She told him. Her brother's name was Daniel. He was 26 years old, and he lived in a facility 3 hours north of the city. A small, carefully managed residential home for people with severe cognitive disabilities. Staffed by people Sophia had chosen personally paid for through money she had moved so carefully over so many years that even Victor's accountants had never fully traced it. Daniel had been born with a condition that required constant care. He was not able to live independently. He would never be able to. And he was the single best person Sophia had ever known, gentle and joyful, and utterly incapable of understanding that the world outside his facility was a dangerous place, run by people who treated human beings as currency. Victor had found out about Daniel in the early years of their marriage. He hadn't threatened Daniel directly. Men like Victor understood that direct threats were inefficient. Instead, he had simply mentioned once very calmly over dinner that he had looked into Sophia's family and found the situation with her brother quite touching. He had said he hoped Daniel's facility would continue to be well funded. He had said it would be terrible if the funding were disrupted. He hadn't said anything else. He hadn't needed to. Sophia had understood the message the way people understand messages delivered in that particular tone completely permanently, and with the full weight of every possible consequence already loaded into it. She had stayed. She had played the devoted wife. She had stood at his side at every event and smiled at every camera, and told herself that Daniel was safe, and that was what mattered. She had told herself this in the morning when Victor was at his most cold, and in the afternoon when she passed the doors of rooms in the house she wasn't allowed to enter, and in the evening when Victor looked at her like a painting he owned that he no longer particularly liked but refused to sell. She had told herself this until it stopped working, and then she had started doing something else instead. She had started collecting evidence. "Evidence," Adrian repeated. "Files," Sophia said. "Records, photographs, account numbers, names, dates." She was very calm about it, the way people are calm about things they've been preparing to say for a long time. Victor is not a careful man when it comes to documentation. He believes his power protects him from consequences. Men who believe that tend to leave traces. "Where is it?" Adrian said. "Somewhere he can't reach it." She met his eyes. "Somewhere you can't reach it either." "Not yet." He felt the shift in the room. This was no longer a conversation between a captive and the man who had taken her. This was something else, two people across a table with information the other needed, both trying to decide how much to give. "You've been building a case," he said, "for 4 years. Against Victor, against everything Victor touched." She leaned forward slightly. "Including the things he did to your family." The air in the room changed. Adrian was very still. The kind of still that wasn't peace. "Say that again," he said. "I know what happened 3 years ago," Sophia said. Her voice was steady, but not cold. "I know about the restaurant. I know about the people who were inside. I know that it wasn't random, and it wasn't a message from a competing crew. I know exactly who gave the order and why, and I have the documentation to prove every piece of it." The silence that followed lasted a long time. Outside, somewhere in the house, a door closed. Footsteps crossed a hallway. The world continued, being the world ordinary and oblivious, while Adrian Valenti sat in a chair 3 feet from the woman he had kidnapped for revenge, and discovered that she had been carrying the proof he'd spent 3 years trying to build. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" he said. "Because Victor owns 6 of the 12 people in this city who would have taken that file." Her jaw tightened. "And because going to the ones who aren't owned meant leaving Daniel exposed, and I was not going to do that." "You needed someone outside the system," Adrian said slowly. "I needed someone who had nothing to lose by fighting Victor in the open." She looked at him. "Someone who was already at war with him." "You needed me." "Yes." "You've been waiting for me." "I didn't know it would be you specifically," she said. "But I knew eventually Victor would do something that pushed the wrong person too far. And when that happened, I would need to be close enough to that person to matter." She paused. "I didn't plan on being dragged out of my house at 10 in the evening. I had imagined a slightly more dignified introduction." Adrian almost laughed. He didn't. "You are telling me," he said carefully, "that you married my enemy, stayed in his house, survived his threats, collected 4 years of evidence against him to protect your brother, and wait for the moment you could bring him down." "Yes." "And you're telling me this now because you are the moment," Sophia said simply. "Because Victor has already made up his mind about me. Because the file I've been building is complete, and I have nowhere left to wait." She held his gaze without blinking. "And because whatever you planned when you had me brought here, you need to understand that I am not a weapon. I am a partner, and if you treat me like one, I will give you everything you need to end this." Adrian looked at her for a very long time. Then he stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his hands loose at his sides and his back to her, and thought about 3 years. 3 years of building toward a single act of revenge. 3 years of telling himself the plan was enough. The plan was clean. The plan would close something that felt permanently open in his chest. He thought about the restaurant. He thought about the smell of smoke he'd carried with him for 3 years, like a coat he couldn't take off. He thought about a woman who had sat in Victor Romano's house for 4 years, carrying documents that could have closed that chapter before it scarred him as deeply as it had. "You had this information," he said, still facing the window. "For 4 years." "Yes." "And you couldn't use it." "Not alone, no." He turned around. "If you're lying to me," he said, "about any piece of this." "I know," she said. "I'm not going to threaten you," he said. "I'm going to tell you something instead." He paused. "I have spent 3 years building a version of what comes next that ends with Victor destroyed. I have not spent those 3 years thinking about what comes after that. I have not been building toward peace. I've been building toward a specific moment of pain. He let that land. If you are telling me the truth about what you have, that moment becomes something larger, something that matters past the day it happens. Yes, Sophia said. That's not a small thing to hand someone. No, she agreed. It isn't. He looked at her. What do you need? He said. And Sophia Romano, who had spent 4 years answering that question with silence, said, I need to know my brother is safe before anything else happens. The call to the facility took 6 minutes. Adrian mated himself with Sophia in the room, which was not something he would have predicted doing 48 hours ago, but which felt in the way that certain decisions feel correct, in a way that moved faster than logic. He spoke to the director personally. He used language that was clear and unmistakable, language that men in his position used when they wanted something understood at a level that went past professional courtesy. When he hung up, 3 additional people were stationed discreetly around the facility's perimeter. None of them were visible. All of them were capable. Sophia had listened to the entire call without speaking. When it was finished, she looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, she said. It was simple. No performance in it. Just 2 words that had the weight of years behind them. Adrian nodded. The file, he said. When do I see it? When I know you're not going to use it in a way that puts Daniel back in danger. How will you know that? I won't be completely certain, she said. But I'm a very good judge of what men are willing to risk for what they want. It's a skill you develop when you spend 4 years watching Victor Romano make decisions. And what does your judgment tell you right now? She was quiet for a moment. That you are a dangerous man who is currently making choices based on grief, she said. And that grief is predictable in ways that make you both more vulnerable and more reliable than you realize. He said nothing. You loved them, she said. It wasn't a question. The people in the restaurant. His jaw tightened. Yes. Then you understand what it is to do something impossible to protect someone you love. A pause. Yes, he said. Then we are not as different as you thought when you had me brought here, Sophia said. Adrian looked at her. She looked back. Outside, the morning had moved past 9 o'clock and into something that felt longer, heavier, fuller than a morning usually did. Somewhere in Victor Romano's compound, a man was making phone calls and moving people and planning an extraction that would prove far more complicated than he imagined. Somewhere in a facility 3 hours north, a young man named Daniel was eating breakfast and watching birds outside a window, completely safe and completely unaware of what his sister had spent 4 years doing to keep him that way. And in a study in the Valenti estate, 2 people who had been placed on opposite sides of a war that neither of them had chosen were sitting with the full weight of a truth neither of them had expected. Victor Romano had built this war carefully. He had designed it to keep 2 people who could destroy him occupied destroying each other instead. He had miscalculated one thing. He had assumed that when Adrian Valenti finally reached across the lines of their conflict and grabbed the most important thing in Victor's life, he would grab someone who was loyal to Victor. He had not expected to grab the one person in the world who wanted him finished more than Adrian did. He had not expected Sophia, and that, as it turned out, was the mistake that would cost him everything. Marco appeared in the doorway at 11:15. He had the careful expression of a man delivering information he wasn't sure how to frame, the expression Adrian had learned to read over 15 years as the precursor to something that would require an immediate decision. We have a problem, Marco said. Victor's people, Adrian said. Not just Victor's people. Marco's eyes moved briefly to Sophia and then back. The crew that came looking, they weren't his regular security. These were outside contractors. People Victor uses when he needs something to not trace back to him. The room temperature seemed to drop a degree. How many? Adrian said. 6 that we've identified. There may be more. Marco paused. They're not trying to recover her. They're trying to remove the problem. The sentence landed the way Marco knew it would. Sophia was very still. He's decided, she said quietly. I knew he would. I knew it was coming. She took a breath. He doesn't want me back. He wants to make sure I can't talk. That's consistent with what our people inside are reporting, Marco said. Adrian stood up. Increase security on the facility, he said to Marco. Tell them to move to secondary protocols. Nothing changes unless I personally authorize it. Already done, Marco said. And the contractors? We're tracking 3 of them. The others are ghosts for now. Find them. Adrian's voice had shifted into something without edges, not louder, but heavier. And when you do, I want to know what Victor told them about the timeline. Marco left. The room was quiet again. Sophia was looking at the window. 4 years, she said very quietly, as if she were talking to herself. I spent 4 years trying to stay invisible enough that he'd never decide I was more valuable gone than present. She paused. I was 2 months away from being ready. I had everything in place. I just needed 2 more months. For what? Adrian said. For the last piece of documentation to come through from a source inside his operation. She finally looked at him. Without it, the file is powerful. With it, it's airtight. Who is the source? She hesitated. I need to know, Adrian said. Not to take it from you. Because if Victor is sending contractors, your source is in danger. She made a decision. He could see the moment she made it, the slight shift in her shoulders, the exhale. His name is Paulo, she said. He's been Victor's bookkeeper for 11 years. He has been feeding me financial records for 8 months. He's the only person inside Victor's operation who knows the full scope of what Victor did to build the war between your family and his. Where is he? He has a sister in Riverside. He was supposed to go there last week. She stopped. I don't know if he went. Adrian pulled out his phone. Give me everything you know about him, he said. I'll find out. It took 40 minutes. Paulo Reyes, 61 years old, 15 years in Victor Romano's employment, the last 11 as head of internal accounts. He had gone to his sister's house in Riverside. He was there now under the impression that he was waiting for a call from Sophia that would never come, because Sophia's phone had been left behind when Adrian's men brought her out of the house. Adrian got him on a line at 12:32. He had one of his people make the initial contact. Keep it brief. Keep it calm. There's been a change in plans. You need to hear directly from someone. Then he handed the phone to Sophia. The conversation lasted 9 minutes. Adrian listened to one side of it. Sophia's voice low and measured, telling Paulo that the situation had changed faster than expected, that what he had needed to come, now that she was somewhere safe, and that he needed to be somewhere safe too. She listened for a long time. Then she said, I know you're scared. I am too. But this is what we've been building toward. If you have it, if you have the final piece, then we are finished. This is over. Another pause. Paulo, she said, I need you to trust me one more time. Whatever Paulo said, it made Sophia close her eyes. Thank you, she said. I'll have someone come to you within the hour. She handed the phone back to Adrian. He has it, she said. All of it, everything I was waiting for. Adrian looked at her. He'll come here, he said. He'll come somewhere safe, which right now appears to be here. She met his eyes. He's terrified. He's been terrified for 8 months. He just needs to know that what he did mattered. It mattered, Adrian said. Tell me that again in a week, she said. When this is done. I will. He meant it. That surprised him. He wasn't accustomed to making promises and immediately believing them. He was accustomed to the careful architecture of words designed to move people in directions that served a plan. He was accustomed to language as a tool. What he'd just said didn't feel like a tool. He moved on before he could think about that any longer. I'm going to need to see what's in the file, he said. Not all of it. Enough to understand what we're working with. Enough to know how to use it. I know, Sophia said. But I want something first. What? I want to call Daniel. He handed her his phone without hesitation. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at him. "You're not going to—" "No," he said. "Make the call." She dialed a number from memory. The call connected after 2 rings. "Hi, Danny," she said, and her voice changed completely. It became lighter, warmer, like a window opening. I know it's been a few days. I'm sorry." A pause. "No, I'm fine. I promise I'm fine." She laughed softly at something. Danny, listen to me. I'm going to be able to come see you soon, okay? Really soon." Adrian stood near the window and did not look at her. He looked at the wall. He thought about a woman who had spent 4 years in a house with a man who terrified her, sleeping in rooms that weren't safe, building a case piece by careful piece, protecting a brother who would never know the price of his safety, and coming every day back to a version of herself that could still make a phone call and sound like this. He thought about what that required. He had believed for 3 years that the most powerful person in the room was always the one who had decided exactly how much they were willing to destroy. He was beginning to revise that position. Paolo arrived at the Valenti estate at 4 in the afternoon. He was a thin man with tired eyes and the careful posture of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. He carried a laptop bag clutched against his chest, with both hands, the way a person carries something they've been afraid of dropping for months. He stopped when he saw Adrian. "This is him," he said to Sophia. "Yes," she said. Paolo looked at Adrian, the way rabbits look at things that might chase them. Victor's going to find that his contractors can't reach you here," Adrian said. His voice was not unkind. It was simply certain. "You're under this roof now. That means something. He'll send more people." "Let him send more people," Adrian said. "I've been waiting for him to send people to me for 3 years. The difference is that now when they come, I won't just be defending myself." Paolo blinked. "What will you be doing?" he said. Adrian looked at the laptop bag. "Ending this," he said. Paolo looked at Sophia. She nodded once. He handed over the bag. The contents took 3 hours to go through. Adrian sat at his desk with Marco and 2 men he trusted completely. Men who had been with the Valenti family since before Adrian inherited everything that came with the name and went through every file, every record, every photograph, every account transfer that Paolo had been quietly photographing and forwarding for 8 months. Sophia sat in a chair to the side. She did not hover. She did not explain. She had organized the files with a logic that was immediately clear, which told Adrian something about how long she had been thinking about this moment. What they found was not what Adrian had expected. He had expected documentation of crimes. Victor Romano's crimes were not a secret to anyone in their world, they were simply unprovable. He had expected financial records and evidence of paid orders. What he found was the full history of a lie. Victor Romano had not started the war with the Valenti family. He had manufactured it. 12 years ago, when Adrian's father and Victor were operating in adjacent territories, with a cautious mutual tolerance, Victor had arranged a series of events, a theft blamed on the Valenti family, a death with Valenti evidence planted at the scene, a document forged with Adrian's father's signature that had pushed the 2 families from coexistence into open conflict. The war had not been inevitable. It had been designed. Victor had spent 12 years profiting from a conflict that existed because he invented it. While both families bled in money and people in years, Victor quietly expanded into the territories they'd abandoned. While Adrian planned revenge for events he believed were real, Victor was running a second empire, funded entirely by the chaos he'd manufactured. The restaurant fire 3 years ago, the fire that had taken the people Adrian spent every day trying to avenge, was not escalation. It was closing a chapter. Victor had been ready to move past the conflict he'd created. He needed the Valenti family's focus to shift. He needed Adrian consumed by grief and vengeance, moving in a direction that would keep him occupied while Victor completed a consolidation that would put him beyond any reach. He burned the restaurant to point Adrian in the wrong direction. And it had worked. For 3 years, it had worked perfectly. Adrian sat with that knowledge for a long time. The room around him was very quiet. Marco said nothing. The two trusted men said nothing. Sophia said nothing. Adrian looked at a photograph of his father taken 12 years ago. A birthday dinner. A photograph he'd pulled from a file because it appeared in a forged document that bore his father's supposed authorization for an act his father would never have ordered. He looked at his father's face in the photograph. He thought about the version of events he'd believed for 12 years. He thought about every decision he'd made based on that version. He thought about the restaurant, about the two people inside, about the grief that had rewritten the person he was. All of it built on something that wasn't real, all of it designed. "Adrian," Marco said quietly. Adrian put the photograph down. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "Get me everything we need to present this publicly. Full documentation chain, every piece authenticated. That's going to take—" "I know what it's going to take," Adrian said. "Start now." He looked at Sophia. She was watching him with an expression that knew exactly what he was feeling, not because she was guessing, but because she had found out her own version of this truth 2 years ago and had to live with it in silence. "I'm sorry," she said. Just that. He looked at her. He understood for the first time what she had been carrying. He understood why she had needed someone who was already in the fight. He understood why she hadn't been able to use any of this alone. And he understood with a clarity that felt like cold water in a dark room that the woman sitting across from him had not been Victor Romano's wife in any real sense of the word. She had been his most dangerous enemy, patient, invisible, and waiting for exactly this moment. The files stayed on Adrian's desk until 2 in the morning. He didn't move them. He didn't close the folders or turn off the lamp or tell Marco to lock the room. He just sat there after everyone else had gone in a quiet that had a different texture than the quiet he was used to. Heavier with edges, the kind of quiet that forms when something you've believed for years turns out to be a construction someone else built for you while you were looking the other way. 12 years. That was what the files said. 12 years of a war that never had to happen. He picked up the forged document again, the one bearing his father's signature, the one that had started the original blood between the families, the one that Victor had planted so carefully that 3 separate investigators over the years had looked at it and found nothing wrong. He held it under the lamp and looked at his father's name written in ink that wasn't his father's hand, and he thought about all the decisions that had cascaded from this single piece of paper. All the years, all the losses, all the mornings he'd woken up calculating how to move against a man he believed had chosen to be his enemy. Victor Romano hadn't chosen to be his enemy. Victor Romano had manufactured one. Adrian set the document down. He leaned back in his chair. And for the first time in 3 years, the grief in his chest didn't feel like fuel. It felt like weight. The kind of weight that sits differently once you understand what it's actually made of. He heard a sound in the hallway. Soft footsteps, unhurried. Sophia appeared in the doorway. She was still dressed. He didn't think she'd slept either. "I saw the light," she said. He didn't tell her to leave. She came in and sat in the same chair she'd used that morning across the desk, at a distance that was neither close nor far, the careful distance of a person who had learned not to assume anything about the space she occupied in a room. "How long did it take you?" he said. "When you found out." She knew what he meant. The moment she'd discovered the same truth he was sitting with now, that the war, the history, the entire framework of injury and response that had defined both their lives, had been built by one man for one purpose. 3 days, she said. I couldn't function for 3 days. I kept going back to the files thinking I'd misread something, that there had to be a mistake. She paused. There wasn't a mistake. No, he said. He's very good at it, Sophia said. Building things that look real. He's been doing it his entire life. Victor doesn't fight people directly. He builds the conditions that make them fight each other. Then he watches. Then he takes what's left. He's been watching us destroy each other for 12 years, Adrian said, and profiting from it. She pulled her knees up slightly in the chair, a small human gesture that didn't fit the conversation, but made it feel more bearable somehow. The Eastern Territory expansion, the port contracts, the financial channel he built through the Romano holdings after your father started pulling back from the waterfront. Every piece of it funded by the space your conflict created. My conflict, Adrian said. My father's conflict. A conflict we didn't start. No, she said. You didn't. He looked at the desk, at the files, at 12 years laid flat in paper and ink. I have to tell my cousin, he said. Sophia was quiet. Nico has been running the Eastern operations since my father stepped down, Adrian said. He's lost 4 people in the last 18 months to actions he believes were ordered by Victor. He's been asking me for permission to escalate. He stopped. He's been asking me to let him start a war. A bigger version of the war Victor already lit, Sophia said. Yes. Adrian pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. If I call him right now and tell him what's actually in these files, that the war he wants to escalate was Victor's design from the beginning, I don't know which direction that goes. Does he trust you? He trusts me completely. A pause. That's the problem. Nico's trust means he'll do what I tell him. And right now, I need to think very carefully about what I tell him before I open that door. Because once he knows, Sophia said, he won't be able to unknow it. And a man like that with that information is going to want to move. Fast, Adrian said. He's going to want to move fast. And fast is what Victor is hoping for, Sophia said. Fast is emotional. Fast is what blows up in your face and gives him room to control the narrative. Adrian looked at her. You've thought about this, he said. For 2 years, she said. I've had nothing to do but think about this. The lamp hummed between them. Somewhere outside, a car moved past slowly, one of his people doing a perimeter check, unhurried and professional. What would you do? He said. If this were your decision. She didn't answer immediately. She thought about it the way people think about things they've already thought through 100 times and are now being asked to say out loud for the first time. I would use Paolo's records to build a financial case first, she said. Not a criminal case. Not yet. A financial case, the kind that can be handed to institutions that exist outside Victor's reach. International banking regulators, federal auditors, the kind of people Victor has no leverage over because his money never touched them directly. That takes time, Adrian said. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Victor will move before 8 weeks. Victor will move when he finds out his contractors couldn't reach me, Sophia said. Which means he's already moving. The question isn't whether he acts first, it's whether what he does first gives us the opening we need. Explain that, Adrian said. Victor believes I'm a loose end, she said. He believes I know things that are dangerous to him. He's right, but he doesn't know the full scope of what I have. He thinks he's dealing with a frightened woman who witnessed something she shouldn't have. She looked at him steadily. When he finds out I'm here, and he will find out probably within 48 hours, his response is going to tell us exactly how scared he is. If he's very scared, he overreacts, Adrian said. Yes. And an overreaction leaves traces. Traces we can add to what we already have. She uncurled from the chair, slightly leaning forward. Adrian. The file is powerful. Paolo's documentation completes it. But what makes it airtight, what makes it impossible for Victor to bury or spin, is if we can show pattern of behavior in real time. If we can document him ordering something against me or against you or against Paolo in the next 48 hours, we don't just have the history, Adrian said. We have the history in the present, Sophia said. All of it. Everything he's ever done and something he's doing right now. That is not a case that gets dismissed or managed or bought. Adrian was very still. You're asking me to use yourself as bait, he said. I'm asking you to let Victor believe his plan is working, she said. Just long enough for him to commit to it on record. He looked at her. She looked back. No, he said. Adrian. I said no. His voice didn't change volume, but something in it changed density. You've spent 4 years being used by that man in ways you didn't choose. You don't walk back into a position of being a tool again. Not in my house. Not in my plan. Sophia was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking for your protection, she said carefully. I know, he said. I'm offering it anyway. The silence stretched. Outside the car finished its perimeter, and the night went quiet again. You're different than I thought you'd be, Sophia said. You said that before. I'm saying it again because it keeps being true. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite guarded anymore. Victor used to talk about you. In the early years. Before the war got expensive enough that he stopped finding it amusing. He'd say, Adrian Valenti is an angry man. Anger makes men stupid. All you have to do is keep pointing the anger in the right direction. He was right, Adrian said. For 3 years, he was right. He was right about the anger, she said. He wasn't right about the stupid. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. I'm going to call Nico in the morning, he said. I'm going to tell him to stand down every planned operation, all of it, freeze everything. He'll push back. He always pushes back. Then he listens. And after that, Adrian said, we are going to build this so carefully that when it lands, Victor Romano doesn't have a single move left. He finally closed the file on his desk. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow starts early. Sophia stood. She moved toward the door and stopped. Adrian, she said. He looked up. What you said about not letting me be used again. She paused, and he could see her deciding how much to say. That's the first time anyone in this world has said that to me. She left before he could answer. He sat with that for a long time. The morning arrived with Marco. Marco always arrived before anyone else, which was one of the things Adrian had valued about him for 15 years. He knocked twice and entered carrying coffee and the specific expression that meant the night had produced information. Victor made contact with a lawyer at 6 this morning, Marco said, setting the coffee down. Not his usual attorney, someone outside his regular network, based in Washington. Federal, Adrian said. Federal, Marco confirmed. Which means he's not just moving against you or Sophia. He's preparing a preemptive play. He's going to try to get ahead of whatever he thinks she knows. That would be my read. Marco sat down in the chair across from the desk. He has friends in the right places. If he files something preemptive, frames Sophia as mentally unstable, or as having fabricated a narrative, or positions himself as the victim of an extortion attempt. He tries to own the story before she can tell it, Adrian said. It's what he does, Marco said. He's been doing it for 12 years. Create the narrative first. Let everyone else respond to the framework he builds. Adrian drank his coffee. He thought about what Sophia had said the night before. 6 weeks. Maybe 8. They no longer had 6 weeks. They possibly didn't have 6 days. Get me the name of the lawyer, he said. And get me everything about the firm. Already running it. Marco paused. There's something else. Adrian looked at him. The contractors Victor sent. We found 3 of the remaining ones. He set a folder on the desk. They weren't just looking for Sophia. They were given 2 names. Adrian opened the folder. He looked at the 2 names. One was Sophia Romano. The other was Paulo Reyes. He closed the folder. Paulo doesn't leave this property, he said. He's already been told. And Sophia, she's aware, Marco said. She was awake before I was. That tracked somehow. Sophia was in the kitchen when Adrian came down. Not sitting at the table, standing at the counter with a phone that wasn't hers, writing something on a piece of paper with the focused, slightly absent expression of someone working a problem in 2 places at once. She looked up when he walked in. Paulo's been sending me pieces of the financial records all night, she said. I had him organize them by source rather than date. It tells a cleaner story that way. When did you talk to Marco about the contractor list? Adrian said. 4:30 this morning. He came to tell me. She turned back to the paper. Victor has given them a completion window. Do you know what that means? How long? 72 hours, she said, which is less about us specifically and more about his federal filing timeline. He wants the loose ends handled before the paperwork lands. So we have 3 days, Adrian said. We have less than that, Sophia said. Because whatever we do, it has to happen before the filing, not after. Once Victor gets a narrative into the federal record, cleaning it out takes months, maybe years. And in that time, he operates freely, Adrian said. He's been operating freely for 12 years, she said. I don't have another 12 years of patience. Her voice was flat, not dramatic, just the particular flatness of someone who has been very patient for a very long time and is running out of places to put it. Adrian sat down at the kitchen table. The financial case you mentioned last night, he said. The international banking angle. Can Paolo prepare a summary document, something that can be handed to outside regulators in a form that's immediately legible? He was a bookkeeper for 11 years, Sophia said. He can make financial records sing opera if you need it. I need it readable and bulletproof. Give him 6 hours. He has 4. Adrian looked at her. Who do you trust outside this city? She stopped writing. She looked at him. There's a federal investigator, she said carefully, in the fraud division. His name is Garrett Wells. He's been trying to build a case against Victor's financial network for 3 years. He's never had access to the internal records. He's never had a source. Paolo and everything Paolo has. She set down the pen. But Wells he's careful. He's careful in the way investigators are careful when they've had cases killed before. If we approach him wrong, he'll treat us like a trap. How do we approach him right? We don't approach him, she said. We give him something he can verify independently, something that proves we're not staging a play. She thought for a moment. The account transfers from 4 years ago, the ones that document Victor's money moving through the Western Territory during the Valenti conflict. If Wells can pull those from the bank records on his own with our documentation as the map, he confirms the story himself, Adrian said. Without our fingerprints on it. He becomes a witness to his own investigation, Sophia said. Victor can't touch that. Adrian was quiet for a moment. You've thought about Garrett Wells specifically, he said. I've thought about him for 8 months, she said. Since Paolo first mentioned that Wells had been sniffing around Victor's outer accounts. You built this around him. I built this around anyone who could carry it past Victor's reach, she said. Wells is the best option because he's clean and he wants it, and he has the authority to act on it if someone puts the right tool in his hand. Adrian looked at her. He had been in rooms with strategists his entire life. People who made plans with charts and spreadsheets and backup contingencies. People who were very good at thinking 10 moves ahead. He had never been in a room with someone who had designed a multi-year dismantling strategy while living inside the house of the person being dismantled. How are you this calm? He said. She blinked. What? You've been running this plan from inside Victor's house at personal risk, protecting your brother, feeding information to a frightened bookkeeper, and designing a case around a federal investigator who doesn't know you exist, he said. And you're standing in my kitchen writing notes like you're planning a grocery run. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, quite a, I've been terrified every single day for 4 years, she said. I just stopped letting it be the loudest thing in the room. A pause. You learn that when you don't have any other options. The fear doesn't go away. You just make it wait its turn. He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he stood up. I'm going to call Nico, he said. Tell Paolo he has 4 hours. He'll need coffee, she said. Magdalena will handle that. She already is, Sophia said. She started a pot for him at 4:30. Adrian stopped in the doorway. Does Magdalena know what we're doing? He said. Magdalena knows everything that happens in this house, Sophia said. She chose not to mention it. I think that tells you something. He left. And for the first time since this started, Sophia let herself breathe. Yeah, The call with Nico Valenti lasted 22 minutes and covered 11 years of history in a way that left Nico silent for so long at the end that Adrian had to say his name twice to confirm he was still on the line. "Say it again," Nico said finally. "Victor manufactured the conflict," Adrian said. "All of it. The original incident. The planted evidence. The document with my father's signature. The terms of the original split. All of it. That's—" Nico stopped. Started again. "Adrian, if you're telling me what I think you're telling me—" 12 years, Nico. 12 years. Nico's voice was doing something controlled. The kind of control that takes effort. "The people I lost were lost in a war someone else started and kept alive for their own benefit." A pause. "How solid is the documentation?" Nico said. Nico. Paulo Reyes. 11 years on the inside. 8 months of financial records. Sofia Romano has been building the case for 4 years. Adrian paused. "It's solid." "Sofia Romano," Nico repeated. "Victor's wife." "Victor's prisoner," Adrian said. "There's a difference." Another long pause. "What do you need from me?" Nico said. That was the thing about Nico. For all his heat, all his impulse when it came to Adrian, he always landed on that question. "What do you need?" "I need you to pull back everything currently running," Adrian said. "Every operation aimed at Victor's network. Tonight. Quietly. No explanation." "If I go quiet, he'll think—" "I know what he'll think," Adrian said. "Let him think it." "You want him comfortable?" Nico said slowly. "I want him confident," Adrian said. "Confident people make expansive moves, and right now I need Victor to make one very large, very well-documented move before we respond. And if he makes that move at one of ours, he won't. He doesn't need to. He's already positioned to make the move through legal channels." Adrian looked at the notes Sofia had left on the table. "He's going federal, Nico. He's trying to get ahead of the documentation before it reaches the people who can use it." Nico was quiet again. "How long?" he said. 3 days. "And after 3 days?" "After 3 days." Adrian said, "Victor Romano doesn't have a single structure left to hide behind." "You sound sure," Nico said. "I'm working with someone who's been preparing for this longer than I have," Adrian said. There was a pause on Nico's end. "The wife," he said. "Yes." "You trust her?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. "I trust what she's built," he said finally. "And what she's built is the best case against Victor Romano that exists in the world right now." Nico made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite skepticism. It was the sound of a man filing information for later. "I'll pull back," he said. "But Adrian, the moment the window opens—" "You'll know," Adrian said. "I promise you'll know." Paulo Reyes worked for 4.5 hours. He sat at a table in a room Adrian had cleared for him, a quiet room, with no windows that would be reached before the exterior walls, if anyone tried to breach the property, and he organized 11 years of Victor Romano's financial history into a document that read less like an accounting record and more like a detailed confession. Sofia sat with him for the first 2 hours. She didn't help with the numbers. That wasn't her role. Her role was the thing she'd been doing for 4 years, sitting near someone who was frightened. Being steady, making the frightened person feel like their fear was something they could work beside, rather than something that owned them. Paulo talked while he worked. He talked the way people talk when they've been quiet about something for a very long time. "I told myself it was just numbers," he said, not looking up from the screen. "When I started, I told myself, they're just numbers. I move money from one column to another, and the columns don't have faces." "But they did," Sofia said. "After a while, yes." He scrolled through a set of transfer records. "You see a number connected to a name connected to a property, and then you hear on the news that property was involved in something that got people hurt, and you realize the column had a face after all. You just weren't looking at it right." "That's why you started copying the records," Sofia said. "That's why I started copying the records," he agreed. "Because if those columns had faces, then the person moving the numbers had a choice, and I had made the wrong one long enough. He pulled up a final set of documents. "This is the piece you've been waiting for," he said. "The link between Victor's shell company in the Caymans and the payment structure for the original Valenti conflict. 12 years old, but the account is still active. The money still moves through it." Sophia looked at the screen. "Paolo," she said, "this is everything." "It's everything," he agreed. He sounded exhausted and lighter at the same time. "I just needed someone to hand it to." She put her hand briefly on his shoulder, a small gesture, real. "You did the right thing," she said. "Tell me that when it's over," he said. "I'll tell you now, and I'll tell you then," she said. "Both times will be true." At 11 in the morning, Garrett Wells received an anonymous package. The delivery was made through 3 separate hands, none of which could be traced to either Adrian or Sophia, routed through a legal services address that Marco had maintained for years as a clean channel for exactly this kind of transfer. The package contained 43 pages of financial documentation. The cover note said, "These are the account structures you've been looking for. Pull the Cayman transfers dated March and September from 11 years ago. The bank records exist. This is your map." It was unsigned. Wells called his team within 15 minutes. Marco had a contact inside the Fraud Division's administrative office, not someone in Wells's chain of command, simply someone who processed scheduling and could confirm whether certain meetings were being called. By noon, the contact reported that Wells had called an all-hands for 2 o'clock and had personally requested access to records from an international banking institution that had been on his watch list for 4 years. Marco delivered this information to Adrian in 3 sentences. Adrian delivered it to Sophia in 2. She sat with it for a moment. Then she said, "He found it." "He found it," Adrian confirmed. "How long before he can move on it?" "Wells is thorough," Adrian said. "He won't move until he's confirmed it independently. 48 hours, maybe less if the bank cooperation is faster than expected." "Victor's federal filing is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon," Adrian said, based on what Marco pulled from the Washington lawyer's calendar. They looked at each other. "We need to delay it," Sophia said, "by 1 day. 1 day gets Wells to the place where his investigation has independent standing," she said. "Once that exists, Victor's preemptive filing doesn't just fail. It becomes evidence of his awareness that an investigation was coming. It becomes obstruction." "Victor filing to protect himself," Adrian said, "becomes Victor committing a federal crime in writing." "Yes," Sophia said. "How do we delay a filing from a Washington lawyer we have no connection to?" Sophia was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "We don't delay the filing," she said. "We accelerate something else." "What?" "Victor's attention." She stood up from the table. "If Victor believes something is about to happen here, specifically here today, he calls the lawyer. He tells him to wait for his signal. He's too controlling to let a legal filing go out without his direct authorization. We need Victor distracted," Adrian said. "We need Victor scared enough to put everything on pause while he deals with what's in front of him," she said. "What do we give him?" She met his eyes. "Me," she said. He started to object. "Not the way you're thinking," she said quickly. "I'm not going to him. I'm going to reach him directly through a channel that can't be traced back to this house. I'm going to let him know I have the documentation, and I'm prepared to deliver it to federal authorities by end of business today." "That makes you a target," Adrian said. "That makes me a threat," she said. "And Victor doesn't react to threats the way he reacts to targets. A target is a problem to eliminate. A threat is a negotiation. He'll pause the filing and try to deal with me directly." And while he's pausing, "Wells confirms the account structures," she said. 48 hours becomes 24. Victor's window closes before he realizes it was ever open. Adrian stood very still. He understood what she was proposing. He understood the risk inside it. He also understood that she had spent 4 years learning exactly how Victor Romano made decisions under pressure, and that she was probably the only person alive who could accurately predict his next move. "If you reach out to him," Adrian said carefully, "and he traces the communication, he won't be able to trace it," she said. "I've been sending Victor untraceable communications for 2 years. Small things. Reminders that I was watching. I needed him slightly off balance, never frightened enough to act, just unsettled enough to second guess." She paused. "He knows the address. He won't know where it's coming from." "You've been psychologically managing Victor Romano for 2 years," Adrian said. "Quietly," she said. "The same way you manage a fire when you can't put it out yet. You don't let it get too confident." Adrian looked at her. He thought about what it meant to spend 4 years inside a dangerous house, managing a dangerous man, protecting a brother, building a case, and quietly keeping the target of that case just uncertain enough to prevent him from moving until the moment was right. He thought about the woman who had been standing in his study the morning before, looking at him the way you look at a wall you've decided to walk through. She had been doing this her entire time in Victor's house. She had been the most dangerous person in that building every single day, and Victor Romano had never seen it. "Write the message," Adrian said. She was already reaching for the paper. The message was 7 lines long. It went through 3 anonymizing layers, emerged from an address Victor had seen before, and arrived on his private device at 2:47 in the afternoon. It said, "I have everything. The Cayman accounts, the forged documentation, the 12-year structure, Paulo's records. I am prepared to deliver to federal authorities at 5 o'clock today unless we speak first." Then it gave a number. Not Adrian's number, not a Valenti number. A clean line Marco had set up in 3 hours, routable to a device in a location that didn't exist. Victor called at 2:51. 4 minutes. That was how long it took Victor Romano to pick up the phone when he believed something was about to collapse. Sophia was ready. She nodded at Adrian. He stepped back. She answered. "Victor," she said. His voice came through the speaker in the middle of the table, controlled quiet with the particular texture of a man who has decided to be reasonable because being loud hasn't worked yet. "Sophia," he said. "I've been worried about you." "No, you haven't," she said. A pause. "You've been making a mistake," he said. "Have I?" "Whatever you think you have, whatever someone has told you those records mean, I know what they mean, Victor," she said. "I've known for 2 years. Another pause. Longer this time. "You're with Valenti," he said. "I'm somewhere safe," she said. "Which is more than I was with you." "Sophia." His voice shifted slightly. Still controlled, but with something underneath it now. Not fear exactly, but the edge of it. "Whatever you've been told about those accounts." "I wasn't told anything," she said. "I found it. Same way I found everything else." She let that land. "I want you to call Washington and delay the filing." Silence. "What filing?" he said. "Victor," she said simply. More silence. "Why?" he said finally. "Because if that filing goes in before I'm ready to deliver what I have," she said, "then I hand it to Wells tonight instead of waiting. And everything you've built to control this narrative becomes evidence of the fact that you knew an investigation was coming." She paused. "You're very good at getting ahead of stories, Victor. You've been doing it for 12 years. But you can't get ahead of this one. You can only decide how many pieces you want to be in when it lands." He was quiet for a very long time. "What do you want?" he said. "I want 1 day," she said. "Give me 1 day before that filing goes out. That's all I'm asking." "And what do I get?" "You get to make your next move with accurate information instead of assumptions," she said. "That's more than you gave anyone else." Victor was quiet. Then he said, "I'll make a call." "I know you will," she said. She ended the call. The room was absolutely silent. Then Marco, standing near the door, let out a breath he'd been holding for 4 minutes. "He's going to call Washington in the next 10 minutes, Sophia said. She set the phone down carefully. Her hand was not entirely steady now, but she set it down as if it were. He'll delay the filing by 24 hours. He'll spend the rest of today trying to trace this number and failing, and by the time he realizes the number is a dead end, Wells will have enough to move. And when Victor realizes what happened, Marco started. He'll be too late, she said. She looked at Adrian. He looked back. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. I've practiced it, she said. In my head, in that house, going over every possible version of that call for 8 months. She took a slow breath. It's different when it's real. Are you all right? The question surprised her. She could see that it surprised her, a small flicker in her expression, the kind that happens when something reaches you before you've had time to build the appropriate response. I will be, she said, in a day. He nodded. He didn't say anything else because there wasn't anything else that needed to be said. She had just done something that required more nerve than most people carried in their entire bodies, and she'd done it sitting at a kitchen table with a phone and 7 lines of text and 4 years of preparation. Victor Romano had spent 12 years believing he was the smartest person in every room. He had spent 4 of those years living with the person who was going to prove him wrong. He just hadn't known it yet. Outside, the afternoon was moving toward evening. Somewhere in Washington, a lawyer was picking up his phone, and somewhere in a fraud division office, Garrett Wells was looking at 43 pages of documentation and starting to understand the shape of something he'd been chasing for 3 years. The clock was running. And for the first time since Adrian Valenti had made a promise to himself at a graveside in the rain, it was running in his direction. Victor Romano called Washington at 3:04 in the afternoon. Marco's contact confirmed it 11 minutes later, a 2-minute call. The lawyer's calendar cleared the filing, pushed by 24 hours pending Victor's direct authorization. Clean. Fast. Exactly what Sophia had predicted. She was right about the 10 minutes too. He'd called in 7. Adrian looked at the confirmation on Marco's phone and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not relief, but something closer to awe. The quiet, unsettling kind. The kind that arrives when you realize the person standing next to you has been operating at a level you didn't know existed. He didn't say that. What he said was, Wells has 24 hours, or solves. He has less than that, Sophia said. She was already moving, already thinking 3 steps forward. Victor called Washington, but he also called Dario Fitch. I know that because Victor always runs both tracks simultaneously. Legal cover and physical cover. He delaying the filing doesn't mean he's standing still. It means he's buying himself time to figure out where I am, while appearing to cooperate. How long before Fitch narrows the location? Fitch is good, she said. 12 hours, maybe 10. Then we have 10 hours before Victor knows you're here, Marco said from the doorway. No, Adrian said. Victor already suspects she's here. He said, you're with Valenti 4 minutes into that call. He looked at Sophia. He's not going to wait for Fitch to confirm what he already believes. Sophia nodded slowly. She had the expression of someone whose calculation had just shifted and who was already running the new numbers. Then we don't have 10 hours, she said. We have whatever Victor decides to give us, Adrian said. Which means we stop waiting for his timeline and we build our own. He looked at Marco. Get me Garrett Wells's direct line, he said. Marco didn't move immediately. That's a risk. If Wells thinks this is coming from the Valenti family, it's not coming from the Valenti family, Adrian said. It's coming from Paolo Reyes, a private citizen with 11 years of documentation who is prepared to speak directly to a federal investigator. He paused. Paolo makes the call. We're not in the room. Marco looked at Sophia. She was already nodding. Paolo will do it, she said. He's been ready to do it for months. He just needed to know someone was standing behind him when he did. Tell him he has 30 minutes to prepare, Adrian said. And tell him he doesn't need to explain anything except the account structures. Wells already has the map. Paolo just needs to confirm he drew it. Marco left the room at a pace that was slightly faster than his usual. Sophia turned to Adrian. "You're moving faster than I expected," she said. "Victor moved faster than I expected," he said. "I'm adjusting. Most people in your position would slow down when the timeline compresses," she said. "Pull back. Reassess." "Most people in my position haven't been waiting 3 years," he said. She looked at him with something that had moved past assessment and was becoming something else, something warmer and more complicated. She didn't name it. She just turned back to the notes on the table. "Then let's not waste the 30 minutes, she said. Paolo made the call at 3:47. He sat alone in the quiet room with the phone and his organized files and a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and he spoke to Garrett Wells for 19 minutes. Adrian and Sophia heard nothing of it that was deliberate. A clean separation, no cross-contamination. Paolo had Adrian's number and one instruction: when it's done, knock twice. He knocked at 4:08. His face when he came out had the particular look of a man who has just set down something very heavy. "He asked me to come in," Paolo said. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. "He's moving tonight," Sophia said immediately. "Yes," Paolo said. He said the account structures match what his team pulled this afternoon from the bank records. He said." Paolo stopped, steadied himself. He said it was the most complete internal documentation he'd seen in 20 years of this work. The room was quiet. "He believed you," Adrian said. "He believed the records," Paolo said. "I just happened to be the person holding them." He paused. He also said something else. He said there were other agencies that had been watching Victor's outer network for different reasons. That the financial records I gave him could connect to 2 separate federal investigations that hadn't been able to find the internal link. He looked at Adrian. He said if the documentation holds, Victor doesn't just face 1 case, Sophia said. He faces 3, Paolo said. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. This one had weight, but also shaped the shape of something coming to a point. Adrian looked at the table, at the files, at everything they'd built in less than 48 hours. 3 federal investigations, he said. With 1 internal source connecting all of them, Sophia said. She looked at Paolo. "You're the thread." "I know," he said. He didn't look frightened about it. He looked like a man who had already made his peace with what it meant. "Paolo," Adrian said, "my people will take you to Wells in the morning. You'll have protection the entire way. The facility housing your sister will have additional security as of tonight." Paolo looked at him. Really looked at him the way you look at someone when you're trying to decide if the words match the person. "Why?" he said. "Because you did the right thing," Adrian said. "And I don't leave people exposed when they've done the right thing." Paolo nodded once, a small serious nod. He went back to his room. Sophia watched him go. "He's going to be okay," she said. It was half statement, half prayer. "Yes," Adrian said. "He is." She looked at him. "You said that the way you say things you intend to make true," she said. "I do," he said simply. Dunk. At 5:15, Victor Romano called Sophia's channel again. Not the anonymous line, a different one, an older one, a number she had used for years inside the Romano household, a number that told her Victor had spent the past 2 hours pulling apart every communication thread she'd ever touched. She looked at the incoming call on Marco's monitoring screen. "He's escalating," Marco said. "He's panicking," Sophia said. "There's a difference." She looked at Adrian. "He doesn't call twice unless he's lost control of something." "Don't answer it," Adrian said. "I have to answer it," she said. "If I don't, he assumes I'm already with Wells. He moves tonight instead of waiting for Fitch's confirmation. And if you do answer it, he thinks he still has leverage," she said. "He thinks there's still a negotiation available. That buys us another few hours." Adrian looked at her for a moment. "What could he say that would give him leverage?" he said. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Daniel," she said. The word landed flat and hard. He doesn't have Daniel, Adrian said immediately. He doesn't need to have him, she said. He just needs me to believe he might. She exhaled slowly. That's been his move for 4 years. He never directly touches Daniel. He just maintains the possibility. Sophia, Adrian said. He waited until she looked at him. Daniel is safe. We confirmed that at 6 this morning. I have 3 people on the ground at the facility right now, and 2 more going in within the hour. I know, she said. Then answer the call knowing that, he said. Don't answer it from fear. Answer it from position. She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her. He could see it, not a visible change, but a change in weight, the way a room changes when someone decides where they're standing and commits to it. She picked up. Victor, she said. His voice was different this time. The controlled reasonableness was gone. What was underneath it was something colder and more direct. I'm going to tell you something, Victor said, and I need you to listen without the Valenti people in your ear. I'm listening, she said. Whatever you think you've built, whatever that bookkeeper gave you, it doesn't matter. You understand me? It doesn't matter, because the only thing that matters in the end is what you can prove. And what you can prove only matters if the right people are still alive to hear it. A pause. Say what you mean, Victor, she said. I mean that I know where Daniel is, he said. I've always known where Daniel is. I let you believe you were being careful, Sophia. I let you believe those moves were invisible. They weren't. Sophia's grip on the phone didn't change. Across the table, Adrian was already on his second phone typing a message to the facility team. Silent. Fast. I believe you. Sophia said, her voice completely even. I believe you've always known. A pause. Victor hadn't expected that. Then you understand what I'm saying, he said. I understand that you've spent 4 years using the possibility of Daniel as a leash without ever actually touching him, she said. Because touching him would be a line you couldn't uncross, and you're a man who likes to keep his options available. She paused. You've never actually been willing to hurt him. You've only ever been willing to let me think you were. Silence. Don't test that theory, Victor said. I'm not testing it, she said. I'm ending it. She looked across at Adrian, who had just received a confirmation reply on his second phone, and gave her a single nod. Daniel is safe, Victor. He's been in a different location for the past 3 hours. I want you to hear that from me directly, so you know that the thing you've been holding over me for 4 years is no longer in your hand. The silence on the other end was a different quality now. The silence of a man recalculating. You've been planning this, he said. Yes, she said. For how long? Long enough, she said. Goodbye, Victor. She ended the call. Her hand was trembling now, not visibly, barely, but she put the phone on the table and pressed her palm flat against the surface and breathed. Adrian said nothing. He waited. She took 3 breaths. Then she looked up. He knows, she said. He knows it's over and he's going to try to salvage something before Wells moves. How? Adrian said. He's going to try to destroy the documentation, she said. Not Paolo's copies, he knows, those are out of reach. But the originals. The source material inside his own operation that would verify everything Paolo gave us. She was already thinking, already moving forward. He has a records administrator, a woman named Celeste Fang. She manages his internal archive. If Victor tells her to purge, the physical backup disappears, Marco said. Wells still has Paolo's documentation, Adrian said, and the bank records. Paolo's documentation is copies, Sophia said. They're authenticated, they'll hold, but if Victor can demonstrate that the originals were deliberately destroyed, his lawyers will spend 2 years arguing chain of custody. She pushed back from the table. We need the originals. They're inside Victor's building, Marco said. I know where Celeste keeps the archive, Sophia said. I spent 4 years in that house. I know which room, which floor, which system. We can't walk into Victor Romano's building, Marco said. We don't need to walk in, Sophia said. She looked at Adrian. Does Celeste Fang's name appear in any of the documentation Paolo brought? Adrian looked at Marco. Marco was already checking. Twice, Marco said after a moment. Administrative authorization signature on 2 of the internal transfer records from 7 years ago. Then she's already a party to the documentation, Sophia said. She's not just Victor's archivist. She's a witness, and right now, she doesn't know that her name is in a file sitting on Garrett Wells's desk. Adrian understood where this was going. You want to reach her before Victor does, he said. I want to give her the same choice Paolo had, Sophia said. She can destroy the records for Victor and become an accessory to obstruction when Wells comes, or she can step aside and let someone extract those records tonight. And if she chooses Victor, then she's made her choice, Sophia said. But Celeste Fang is not a loyal soldier. She's a 53-year-old woman who has been running Victor's archive because it was a well-paying job, and she was good at it. People like that are loyal to the paycheck, not the man. The moment the paycheck becomes a liability. She looks for an exit, Adrian said. She already has one, Sophia said. She just doesn't know it yet. Adrian looked at Marco. Find her personal contact, he said. Not her work line, her personal. I'll need 20 minutes, Marco said. You have 15, Adrian said. Yeah. Marco found it in 11. The call to Celeste Fang happened at 6:02 in the evening. Adrian made it himself this time. Not Sophia. Sophia's voice was too close to Victor's world, too recognizable if Celeste had ever been in the room when Victor and Sophia spoke. And not Marco, whose name carried connotations in the circles that knew what the Valenti family did. Adrian, with his voice stripped of everything, except the quiet certainty that came naturally to him, called Celeste Fang and told her 4 things. First, her name appeared twice in documentation, currently being reviewed by a federal fraud investigator named Garrett Wells. Second, that documentation was authenticated and independently verified and would be formally entered into a federal case within the next 18 hours. Third, there was a significant legal difference between an unwitting administrative signatory and a knowing participant in obstruction of justice, and that difference depended entirely on what happened to certain original records in the next 3 hours. Fourth, she was being given this information privately before anyone else, and what she did with the next 20 minutes was entirely her decision. He gave her a number. He hung up. She called back in 6 minutes. The conversation lasted 4. When it ended, Adrian put the phone down and looked at Sophia. She's not going to touch the archive, he said. Sophia closed her eyes for 1 second. She's going to call Victor, Marco said. She'll have to. He's probably already reaching out to her. She's going to tell him she can't reach the system, Sophia said. A technical issue. She'll say the archive server went down. She looked at Adrian. She's done it before. When she needed time, she'd claim a system failure. Victor trusts her enough not to question it. How do you know that? Adrian said. Because I've watched her do it twice, Sophia said. Once when Victor asked her to do something she wasn't comfortable with. She bought herself 48 hours with a fabricated server error. She paused. Celeste Fang has been managing Victor at the edges for years. She just never had a reason to manage him in a direction that helped anyone else. Now she does, Adrian said. Now she does. Sophia agreed. He looked at her. How many people inside Victor's operation have been quietly managing him like this? He said. She considered the question. More than he knows, she said. That's the thing about men like Victor. They believe their control is total because they've never tested the edges carefully enough. The people around them learn to give the performance of loyalty while quietly making decisions about how far they're actually willing to go. She paused. It's why his empire looks solid from the outside and sounds hollow when you knock on it. And you knew all of this, Adrian said. I lived in it, she said. For 4 years. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I owe you an apology. She looked at him, not expecting that. When I had you brought here, he said, I treated you like a piece of property, something to use to send a message to another man. I didn't ask who you were. I didn't consider what your life was." He held her gaze. "That was wrong. Regardless of what I knew about Victor or what I was trying to accomplish, what I did was wrong." Sophia looked at him for a long time. "Yes," she said. "It was." He nodded. He didn't defend it. He didn't follow it with an explanation. He just let the acknowledgement sit. She seemed to understand something in that. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saying it without the excuse attached." At 7 in the evening, Victor Romano walked into Dario Fitch's office and shut the door. Marco's man inside the compound couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read the room. Fitch's body language, rigid, responsive, the posture of someone receiving instructions they weren't going to argue with. Victor's hands moving more than usual, which was not normal for Victor, who was famously still when he spoke. A call made from the room at 7:12. A second call at 7:19. Fitch leaving at 7:23 with 4 people. Marco relayed all of this to Adrian in real time. Adrian listened, said nothing until Marco finished. "He's sending Fitch," he said. "With 4 people," Marco confirmed. "Not to the facility," Sophia said immediately. "He already knows Daniel is moved. This is about me." "He's done being subtle," Adrian said. "He tried the legal approach, he tried negotiation. Now he's going back to what he's always known." "He's sending them here," Marco said. "Or he believes he's sending them here," Adrian said. He looked at Marco with an expression Marco had seen before, the expression that meant the next 30 seconds were going to determine the next 30 hours. "I need you to make a call to the 2 federal agents we've had on retainer for exactly this kind of situation." "Adrian," Marco said carefully, "if we call federal contacts and Victor's team shows up, then Victor's team shows up at a location that has federal witnesses present," Adrian said, "and every action they take becomes federal interference." Marco understood. He left the room. Sophia looked at Adrian. "You had federal contacts on retainer," she said. "I have been fighting Victor Romano for 3 years," he said. "I made contingencies." "For what?" "For the moment someone from his operation showed up on my property in a way I could document," he said. "I never had cause to use the contingency, because until 48 hours ago, Victor was always careful enough to stay just outside the line." "He's not being careful anymore," she said. "No," Adrian said. "Because you frightened him. That call this afternoon, you told him Daniel was safe, and you told him you were ending it. You took away the thing he's been using to manage you for 4 years. He looked at her. Men like Victor, when they lose their leverage, stop thinking strategically. They start thinking emotionally. And emotional men make documentable mistakes. "You wanted him emotional," she said. "I needed him emotional," he said. "And you gave me that." She absorbed this. "You've been running a parallel strategy," she said. It wasn't an accusation, it was the tone of someone recognizing something they should have seen sooner. "Not against you," he said immediately. "Alongside you. The same goal, a different tool." The federal retainer. The federal retainer, the clean channel to Wells, the facility security, the Celeste Fang call. He paused. "Each of those moved because of what you gave me. The information, the contacts, the understanding of how Victor makes decisions. I couldn't have placed any of those pieces without you." She looked at him. "We've been working together," she said slowly, "since about 2 o'clock yesterday morning." "Yes," he said, without formally agreeing to. "Yes," he said again. She was quiet for a moment. "That's either a very good sign," she said, "or a very complicated one." "Possibly both," he said. Dario Fitch arrived at the outer perimeter of the Valenti property at 8:47 in the evening. He did not come through the main approach. He came from the Eastern Service Road, a route that someone had clearly researched, a route that told Adrian exactly how much preparation had gone into this particular move. He came with 5 men, not 4. Fitch had added someone between leaving the compound and arriving here, a detail that Marco's perimeter team caught on the second vehicle. He also came to find that the Valenti property's eastern approach was currently occupied by two vehicles that were not Valenti vehicles, clean unmarked with federal plates that anyone who knew what they were looking for would recognize immediately. The two federal agents Adrian had called were named Brewer and Castillo. They had been on a particular kind of retainer with the Valenti family for 18 months, not informants, not compromised agents, but people who operated in the space between official investigation and informal intelligence. They were there not to arrest anyone. They were there to observe, to see, to be seen seeing. Fitch stopped at the perimeter. His 5 men stopped behind him. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Fitch made a call. Victor's response took 3 minutes. 3 minutes in which Fitch stood perfectly still at the edge of Adrian's property, while federal agents who absolutely were not supposed to be here watched him from 30 feet away. Then Fitch left. All 5 men. Gone. Marco watched them go and then walked back into the house and said 2 words to Adrian. He's retreating. Adrian was sitting at the table with Sophia and what remained of Paolo's files. He looked up. All of them, he said. All of them. Clean exit. Nobody came past the perimeter. Sophia put both hands on the table. He saw the federal plates, she said. He called Victor. Victor told him to stand down. Victor is not going to act with federal witnesses present, Adrian said. Not on property, not physically. That's the one line he's never crossed. Because physical action against a federal witness creates a different category of charge, Sophia said. He knows that. So he's retreating to the legal strategy, Marco said, which means he's calling Washington to put the filing back on schedule, Sophia said. She looked at Adrian. We just used up the time we bought. How long? Adrian said. If he calls Washington right now, the filing could go in as early as tomorrow morning, she said. He doesn't need to wait for his original window. He was pushing it to 24 hours as a negotiation move. Now that he knows the negotiation is dead, he accelerates, Adrian said. Yes. They looked at each other. What does Wells need to move before that filing lands? Adrian said. He needs Paolo in person tomorrow morning, she said. That's the meeting 8 o'clock. Paolo testifying directly in person with documentation gives Wells enough to open a formal investigation. Once the formal investigation is open, Victor's preemptive filing becomes what you said, Adrian said. Evidence of awareness. Obstruction. But only if Wells opens the investigation first, she said. If the filing goes in before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, we lose the sequence, Adrian said. We lose the sequence, she confirmed. The room was quiet. Then Marco said very carefully, It's 9 o'clock. Washington lawyers don't typically file before business hours. Victor pays enough to make exceptions, Sophia said. Even so, Marco said. The earliest a filing of this complexity goes in is 7, more likely 8:39. The system itself has processing delays. Sophia looked at him. Paolo's appointment is at 8, she said. Yes, Marco said. So we have a window, she said. Narrow. Narrow, Marco confirmed. Adrian stood up. Then Paolo goes in at 7, he said. Not 8. Marco, call Wells. Tell him Paolo is available at 7 if Wells can accommodate. Tell him... He paused. Tell him there's been a development on the opposing side that makes the earlier time advisable. Marco pulled out his phone. Wells is going to know what that means, Sophia said. Wells is a 20-year investigator, Adrian said. He already knows. Marco stepped out to make the call. Sophia looked at Adrian. If Wells takes the 7 o'clock, she said, and Victor's Washington filing goes in at 7:30. It goes in 20 minutes after a formal federal investigation opens with documented cause and an in-person witness, Adrian said. At that point, Victor's filing isn't preemptive, it's reactive, and reactive filings don't control narratives. They respond to them. She stared at him. You've been thinking about this, she said. Since 6 o'clock this afternoon, he said, while you were making calls and running perimeter logistics. Yes? At the same time? Yes. She shook her head slightly, not in disbelief in something that looked almost like reluctant admiration. You're very good at this, she said. I've been fighting for my family's survival for 3 years, he said. You learn to think on multiple levels, or you don't survive. Victor always said you were reactive, she said. That your anger made you predictable. Victor was working from outdated information, Adrian said. He was, she agreed. He never saw you calm. He looked at her. She looked back. Marco returned. Wells takes the 7 o'clock, he said. He said, and I'm quoting directly, he said, tell your client that if this documentation is what it looks like, the earlier the better for everyone. Sophia exhaled. He knows, she said. He's known since this afternoon, Marco said. He was being careful about how fast he moved. Now he has a reason to move faster. What was his tone? Sophia said. Marco considered. Like a man who has been looking for a door for 3 years, and someone just handed him a key. She nodded. For the first time since this started, something that was not calculation moved across her face. Something that was not strategy or management, or the practiced steadiness of a woman who had learned to make fear wait its turn. She looked relieved, genuinely, quietly, completely relieved. Adrian saw it. He looked away, giving her the moment without the weight of being watched through it. You should sleep, he said. Tomorrow starts at 5:30. I won't sleep, she said. Neither will I, he said. But the offer stands. She almost smiled. It was close. Close enough that he noticed. She stood, gathered the notes from the table, and moved toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. Victor is going to do something tonight, she said. Between now and morning, I know him. He doesn't go quiet when he's losing. He goes loud in a direction you're not looking. I know, Adrian said. What direction are you not looking? She said. It was a real question, not rhetorical. He thought about it, and then his phone rang. The number on the screen was one he hadn't seen in over a year. Nico. Not a scheduled call, not a routine update. Nico calling at 9:17 in the evening after being told to pull back all operations and go silent. Adrian answered. Tell me, he said. Nico's voice on the other end was the controlled version, the voice he used when something had happened that he hadn't allowed himself to react to yet. Victor's people made contact with 3 of our outer operators tonight, Nico said. Not aggression, offers, cash relocation, full protection, new identities. They were approached within a 2-hour window. A pause. Victor is trying to buy pieces of our operation. He's building leverage, Adrian said. If he flips even one of them, he has someone inside who can testify that the Valenti family coerced a federal witness, Nico said. Paulo Reyes. Whatever Paulo is doing tomorrow morning, Victor is trying to build a counter-narrative tonight. Did any of them accept? Not yet, Nico said. But 2 of them are thinking about it. Adrian, if Victor can put one person on record saying Paulo was approached and influenced by our family, it muddies everything. Adrian looked at Sophia. She had heard enough from one side of the conversation to understand the shape of it. He's not attacking the documentation, she said quietly. He's attacking the credibility of the witness. Yes, Adrian said. He doesn't need to prove Paulo is lying, she said. He just needs to introduce enough doubt that the investigation slows, that the filing has time to land, that the sequence shifts back in his favor. Who are the 2 operators? Adrian said into the phone. Nico named them. Adrian knew both men. He knew their histories, their families, their financial situations, the specific pressures that would make Victor's offer look genuinely attractive to each of them. I need you to reach them personally, Adrian said. Tonight. Not a message. You in person. I'm 3 hours from both of them, Nico said. Then you started driving 40 minutes ago, Adrian said. Tell them, tell them exactly what Victor is. Don't frame it as loyalty. Don't make it about the family. Show them the documentation we have. Show them what Victor actually is, and what happens to the people around him when his world comes down. And if they're still undecided after that, then they've made their choice, Adrian said. And we deal with the consequences. But I think they'll decide correctly when they see what we have. Send me a summary, Nico said. Something I can show them tonight. Marco will send it in 20 minutes, Adrian said. Nico. I know, Nico said. I already know. Drive fast. Don't make noise. Be the thing they need to see tonight, not the thing they're afraid of. Yes, Adrian said. He hung up. Sophia was watching him. Victor is working every angle simultaneously, she said. Legal, physical, inside your operation, outside documentation. He's a desperate man doing what desperate men do, Adrian said. He's swinging at everything and hoping something lands. Desperate men who swing at everything sometimes connect, she said. Yes, Adrian said. Which is why we make sure that by 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, it doesn't matter what he connects with. He looked at her. What do you know about his relationship with the operators Nico mentioned? Nothing specific, she said. But Victor's approach to buying people is consistent. He never leads with money. He leads with information, specifically with something personal about the target that they didn't know he knew. It makes them feel exposed first, then the money feels like relief. He's already done research on both of them, Adrian said. He did the research before he made the approach, she said. He would have had files on every vulnerable node in your operation. He's been building that intelligence for years. Standard Victor, Marco said from the doorway. Standard Victor, she agreed. Then Nico's visit tonight isn't just about persuasion, Adrian said. It's about giving them something Victor's file doesn't have, context, the full picture of what they're actually choosing between. Nico can do that, Marco said. Nico can do that. Adrian confirmed. He looked at the clock. 9:31. 9.5 hours until Paolo walked into Garrett Wells's office. He looked at Sophia. She looked at him. The direction you weren't looking, she said, was inside your own operation. Yes, he said. Victor knew that, she said. He always finds the place you're not protecting. He found it, Adrian said. But he found it too late. Don't say that yet, she said. Not until morning. He nodded. She was right. He'd learned in the past 48 hours, at a pace that felt like 48 months, that the one consistent error confident men made was calling a thing finished before it was finished. He was not going to make Victor Romano's mistake. He was going to wait until morning, and he was going to be very, very sure. Nobody slept. That was the honest truth of it. Adrian sat at his desk and worked through the night, not pacing, not drinking, just working, moving pieces, making quiet calls, sending Marco to confirm and reconfirm every layer of what they'd built. Sophia stayed at the kitchen table with Paolo's files until 1 in the morning, reorganizing the financial summary into a sequence that would read cleanly to Wells in the morning, thinking through every question a 20-year investigator might ask, and making sure the documentation answered it before the question landed. Paolo slept for 3 hours, and then couldn't anymore. He got up at 4 and made coffee and sat in the quiet room with his hands around the mug and thought about 11 years of moving numbers that had faces. Magdalena appeared at 4:30 without anyone asking and made breakfast that nobody ate but everyone appreciated. At 5:15, Nico called. Adrian answered on the first ring. Both of them, Nico said. His voice had the texture of a man who had driven 6 hours in the night and talked harder than he'd driven. Both stayed, Adrian said. Both stayed, Nico confirmed. The second one took longer. Victor had something on him, personal family situation, the kind of thing you think nobody knows. When I told him what Victor actually is, what's in those files, what his world looks like in 18 hours. Nico paused. He cried Adrian. A 50-year-old man sat in his kitchen at 2 in the morning and cried because he realized how close he came to handing his name to Victor Romano. "You did good," Adrian said. "I didn't do anything except show up with the truth," Nico said. "The truth did the work." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Come here," he said. "When you're done driving, come to the house." "I'm already driving toward you," Nico said. "I figured you'd say that." He hung up. Adrian set down the phone and sat for a moment with the specific feeling of something holding rather than breaking the structural sensation of a plan under pressure, finding that its joints were solid. Then he stood up and went to find Sophia. She was exactly where he expected at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, files organized, looking like someone who had spent the night in genuine rest rather than sleepless tension. He knew it was performance. He'd learned enough in the past 2 days to recognize what her performance cost her. But he also understood why she maintained it the same way he understood why he kept his own face steady in rooms that were trying to break him. Some things you held because holding them was the only way forward. "Nico got both of them," he said. She exhaled. One breath. Clean. "Then Victor has no inside witness," she said. "No," Adrian said. "And Celeste Fang hasn't touched the archive." "Marco confirmed it at midnight and again at 3, he said. "The archive is intact." "Then what we have is what we have," she said. "And what we have is enough." She said it with certainty, but underneath the certainty was something that had lived in her for 4 years and was only now beginning to understand that it might be allowed to rest. "Paolo needs to be ready in an hour," Adrian said. "Paolo's been ready for 8 months, she said. He almost smiled. She caught it. "That's the second time you've almost done that," she said. "Done what?" Smiled. "In the past 48 hours. He looked at her. "I haven't had much reason to smile recently," he said. "No," she said. "Neither have I." She looked down at the files. "Maybe after today." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. At 6:15 they put Paolo in a car. Adrian's 2 best people, not Marco, was needed at the house, but 2 men whose names never appeared in any document and whose faces had been reliable since the beginning took Paolo out through the secondary exit, a route that had been checked and cleared at 5:30 and again at 6. Paolo stood at the door before he got in. He looked at Adrian, then at Sophia. "If this goes wrong," he started. "It won't," Sophia said. "But if it does, Paolo," she said. She waited until he looked at her properly. "You have been the bravest person in this entire thing. Not Adrian, not me. You. You stayed inside that operation for 11 years and you kept your conscience alive and you built something with it that is going to matter to people you will never meet." She held his gaze. "Whatever happens in that office this morning, you already did the right thing. That part is finished. That part cannot be taken back." Paolo looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and got in the car. They watched it leave. "You meant that," Adrian said. "Every word," she said. He looked at her profile, the steadiness of it, the way she carried things without letting them show on the surface, until exactly the moment she chose to let them show. "Who told you that when you needed to hear it?" he said. She turned to look at him. "Nobody," she said simply. "I told myself. Repeatedly. In a house where the only person I could trust was Daniel, and Daniel doesn't know any of this exists." Something moved in his chest. Not pity. Something more complicated than that. Something that recognized the specific shape of what it was to carry something enormous in complete silence. "Come inside," he said. "We wait together." At 6:53, Victor Romano made a call to his Washington attorney. Marco's contact flagged it at 6:58. The call lasted 8 minutes. 8 minutes was long for a scheduling call. Marco's contact couldn't access the content, but 8 minutes meant it wasn't a simple reinstatement of the filing timeline. 8 minutes meant something in the conversation had required back and forth. Marco came to Adrian with this at 7:04. Paolo's appointment with Wells had started at 7 o'clock, 4 minutes in. "He's not accelerating the filing," Sophia said when Marco delivered the information. "If he were accelerating, that call would have been 2 minutes. He's changing the content." "Changing it how?" Marco said. "He's pivoting," she said. "He spent last night losing every tool he thought he had. The physical approach failed. The operator recruitment failed. The archive purge failed. He's down to the legal strategy, and he knows the legal strategy has to work because it's the last one." She was thinking aloud, working through it at pace. If he changes the content of the filing, he's no longer trying to preempt the investigation. He's trying to redirect it. Redirect it toward what Adrian said. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Toward you," she said. The room went very still. "He can't build a credible case against Adrian without—" Marco started. "He doesn't need credible," Sophia said. "He needs disruptive. If Victor files something that names Adrian Valenti as the orchestrator of a coercion scheme against Victor's former employee, she meant Paolo, and names me as a complicit party who was removed from my home against my will. He turns the story around," Adrian said. "He makes us the aggressors," she said. "He makes Paolo a coerced witness and me a victim of the Valenti family instead of his. And he does it in a federal filing, which means regardless of the truth, there is now a federal document in existence that says the opposite of what Wells is hearing right now." "That document would be demonstrably false," Marco said. "It would take months to demonstrate that," she said. "And in those months, Victor's attorneys fight every piece of the investigation on the grounds that the primary witness was compromised, and the primary documentation was assembled under duress." She looked at Adrian. "He doesn't win, but he survives long enough to restructure, long enough to move assets, long enough to disappear the parts of himself that can't survive scrutiny." Adrian looked at the clock. 7:07. Paolo had been with Wells for 7 minutes. "If Victor names me in a federal filing," Adrian said slowly, "and that filing goes in before Wells formally opens his investigation." "Wells has to pause," Sophia said. "Standard procedure, conflict of interest review. It could be 48 hours, could be a week." She met his eyes. "Victor doesn't need a week. He needs 48 hours. "To do what?" Marco said. "To make 3 phone calls and move enough money offshore that the financial case becomes significantly harder to trace," she said. "He's been prepared for this. He has exit structures. He just needs the window." "How long until his Washington attorney can file?" Adrian said. "The filing itself takes 20 minutes once it's submitted," Marco said. "If Victor called at 6:53 and the call lasted 8 minutes, he's been building the new filing since then," Sophia said. "He had it half ready. He just needed to change the targets." She looked at Adrian. "He can file by 7:30, maybe sooner." 23 minutes. Adrian was very still for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Wells directly. It rang twice. "Mr. Valenti," Wells said. He sounded like a man who had been awake since before Paolo arrived and was operating at the particular sharpness of someone who had been waiting for this call. "There's a filing coming from Victor Romano's Washington attorney," Adrian said, "within the next 20 minutes. It will name me and Sophia Romano as the targets of a coercion and kidnapping allegation. It's designed to create a conflict of interest in your investigation." Wells was quiet for 2 seconds. "I see," he said. "I need you to understand the timeline," Adrian said. "Paulo Reyes came to you voluntarily. He was not coerced. He was protected, yes, on my property, because Victor Romano had already dispatched contractors with his name on a list. I have documentation of that order. I have the federal agents Brewer and Castillo as witnesses to Victor's physical approach on my property last night, and I have the record of every call Victor made in the past 18 hours. He paused. "Whatever is in that filing, I can document every aspect of our side of this in real time." "Mr. Valenti," Wells said, "I'm going to need you to understand something about how this works." "Tell me," Adrian said. "When a conflicting filing comes in, I have procedural obligations," Wells said. But procedural obligations are not the same as investigative paralysis. If I have already opened a formal investigation before that filing lands, he paused. Then the filing is reactive, not preemptive. And reactive filings from subjects of active federal investigations are treated differently than preemptive filings from private parties. Adrian understood. How long to open the formal investigation from your end? He said. Mr. Reyes is very thorough, Wells said. I've been reviewing documentation for 7 minutes. I've already confirmed 2 of the primary account structures against independent banking records. I need 12 more minutes. You have less than 20, Adrian said. I know, Wells said. That's why I'm telling you this instead of hanging up. A pause. Keep your line open. He didn't hang up. He put Adrian on hold. Adrian looked at Sophia. She had heard every word. She was very still. The hold music was something generic and institutional that felt obscene in the context of what was happening. Marco looked at the clock on the wall. 7:11, 7:12, 7:13. Nobody spoke. Sophia put both hands flat on the table, not anxious grounding, the way you hold something solid when the thing you're waiting for is entirely out of your hands. 7:14. 7:15. The hold music stopped. Mr. Valenti, Wells said. I'm here, Adrian said. The Garrett Wells Fraud Division has formally opened an investigation into Victor Romano Holdings and associated entities as of 7:15 this morning, Wells said. The case number is, he read it out, and it is now a matter of federal record. Adrian closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. 1 second. Then he opened them. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, Wells said. Bring me Sophia Romano. She's the final witness I need for complete standing. If she's willing to make a formal statement, she'll be there by 10, Adrian said. He looked at Sophia. She was already nodding. He ended the call. The room was quiet. Then Marco said in a voice that didn't quite manage to be professional, It's done. It's started, Sophia said. It's not done. But she was almost smiling when she said it. This time it wasn't close. It was real. Small and exhausted and built from 4 years of waiting, but real. Adrian looked at her. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. Victor Romano's Washington filing came in at 7:29, 14 minutes after Wells opened the formal investigation. Marco received the alert from his contact at 7:32 and walked into the room where Adrian and Sophia were sitting and said, It landed. Sequence, Adrian said. Investigation opened at 7:15, Marco said. Filing received at 7:29, 14 minutes reactive. In the federal record, Sophia said. In the federal record, Marco confirmed. She breathed out. His attorneys will argue it anyway, she said. They'll try to challenge the timing. Let them challenge it, Adrian said. 14 minutes is 14 minutes. The timestamp doesn't move. She looked at him. He's going to know, she said. When his lawyers see the timestamp, he's going to know exactly what happened. Yes, Adrian said. And he's going to know it was me, she said. Not just the documentation, the timing. He's going to know I was the one who understood the sequence. Yes, Adrian said. She was quiet. How does that feel? He said. It was a real question. He had learned in the past 2 days to ask real questions. She thought about it. Strange, she said. I've spent 4 years being invisible to him, being what he thought I was, the performance he wanted. And now he's going to know that the person who sat at his table and smiled at his cameras was the person who... She stopped. I don't feel triumphant. I thought I would. I've imagined this moment, and I thought I would feel... Relief, Adrian said. More than this, she said. Relief takes time, he said. It doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in pieces over days and weeks when you realize you're no longer calculating the same things. She looked at him. You know that from experience, she said. I know it from the period after my father's death, he said, when the immediate grief gave way to something longer and quieter and more complicated. He paused. I've been in a version of that grief for 3 years. It doesn't look like grief from the outside. It looks like planning and strategy and controlled anger, but underneath it, it's grief, she said. Yes, he said. They sat with that for a moment. We need to leave for Wells' office at 9:15, Marco said from the doorway. He said it quietly, knowing he was interrupting something that mattered. I know, Sophia said. She looked at Adrian. I need an hour. Take it, he said. She stood up. She didn't move toward the door immediately. She stood and looked at him with an expression that had shed almost everything practiced and careful. That was something close to simply what it was. I didn't know what to expect from you, she said. When your people put me in that car, when I stood in your study and you looked at me like a problem to be managed, I had spent so long surviving one man that I wasn't prepared for... She stopped. Started again. I wasn't prepared for you to be someone I could work with. Someone I could... She stopped again. He waited. I was going to say trust, she said, but that's not quite right either. It's different from trust. What is it? He said. She looked at him for a long moment. I'll let you know when I figure it out, she said. She left. He sat alone in the kitchen with the empty coffee cups and the organized files and the morning light and thought about a question he hadn't asked himself yet. Not because he was afraid of it, but because the past 48 hours hadn't left any space for it. He asked it now. What happens after? Nico arrived at 8:45. He looked like 6 hours of driving and 2 hard conversations and no sleep, which was exactly what he was. He walked in the door and Marco handed him coffee, and he drank half of it standing in the hallway before he said anything. Then he looked at Adrian and said, "Tell me everything." Adrian told him, not the summarized version he'd given on the phone. The full version from the moment Sophia had stood in his study and told him he'd made a mistake to the files to Paolo, to the call with Wells to the federal investigation opening at 7:15 that morning, with Victor's filing arriving 14 minutes too late. Nico listened without interrupting. That was not Nico's default mode. Nico interrupted. Nico asked questions mid-sentence and doubled back and pushed on details. The fact that he listened without a single word for 15 minutes told Adrian more about the weight of what he was hearing than any response would have. When Adrian finished, Nico was quiet for a long time. 12 years, Nico said. Yes, Adrian said. We've been fighting a war for 12 years that he... Nico stopped. His jaw tightened. He sat there, the whole time. He sat there and watched us, and the whole time he was the one who... Yes, Adrian said. Nico put the coffee down. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment. The people we lost, he said. I know, Adrian said. My brother, Nico said. His voice was quiet in the way that very large things are quiet. 3 years ago, I told myself it was the war. I told myself that was the cost of what we were, that he was a casualty of something real. He took his hands away from his face, and it wasn't real. It was something Victor built, to keep us looking the wrong direction. Nico, don't. Not angry, not at Adrian, just the word alone drawing a boundary around something he needed to hold himself. Give me a minute. Adrian gave him a minute. Nico stood at the counter and drank his coffee and looked at nothing. Then he straightened. What do you need from me today? He said. Nothing operational, Adrian said. The investigation is open. Wells has Paolo. Sophia is giving her statement at 10. Today is about letting the system work. Letting the system work, Nico repeated. The phrase sat oddly in his mouth, not cynical, just unfamiliar. In their world, waiting for the system was not a concept that got much exercise. I know, Adrian said. And tomorrow, when the investigation starts to bite, and Victor tries to move, then we respond, Adrian said. But we respond through the structure we've built, not through what we would have done before. Nico looked at him. You've changed, he said. It wasn't a criticism. It was an observation careful and considering. In 48 hours. I've been given information that changes things, Adrian said. It's not the information, Nico said. It's the woman. He said it simply without weight. She changed how you're thinking. She changed what I'm thinking about, Adrian said carefully. Nico studied him. She's good, he said. Not asking about character. Asking in the comprehensive way men like them asked, meaning, is she solid? Is she real? Can she be trusted with the kind of weight that comes with the choices being made here? She's the best strategist I've sat across from, Adrian said, including anyone in our family, including anyone I've negotiated against in 12 years. Nico nodded slowly. Then I look forward to meeting her, he said. Sophia came downstairs at 9 o'clock. She'd changed into something clean. Magdalena had found it something that fit well enough without being Victor's, and she'd tied her hair back, and she looked for the first time since Adrian's men had brought her out of the Romano house, like a person who was exactly where she'd chosen to be. She stopped when she saw Nico. Nico stopped when he saw her. There was a moment. Nico Valenti, she said. Sophia Romano, he said. Former Sophia Romano, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Measuring not hostile, just the honest assessment of someone who had heard a great deal about a person in a short time and was now looking at the person directly. You built the case, he said. Paolo built the case, she said. I organized it. Don't do that, Nico said. She looked at him. Don't minimize what you did, he said. I drove 6 hours last night and I talked 2 men back from the edge of making the worst decision of their lives, and I did it because of what's in those files. Because of what you built. He paused. My brother died in this war. I need to be able to look at the person who had the most to do with ending it and say that directly. The room was very quiet. Sophia held his gaze. I'm sorry about your brother, she said. I know, he said. Victor. I know what Victor did, he said. You don't have to explain it. He exhaled slowly. I'm not standing here angry. I'm past angry. I'm standing here trying to understand what 12 years of a war that didn't have to happen means for the rest of the years that come after. He looked at her steadily. Does it end? When this is over and Victor's in front of a federal judge and the investigation runs its course, does it actually end? It ends the war, she said carefully. What comes after the war is different. What comes after is the work of figuring out who you are when you're not fighting. Nico looked at Adrian. Adrian said nothing. Yeah, Nico said finally. I thought so. He picked up his coffee and moved to give them space. The drive to Wells's office took 31 minutes. Adrian went with Sophia. Marco drove. 2 additional vehicles ran a quiet perimeter visible enough to function as a deterrent, discreet enough not to turn a federal building visit into a spectacle. They didn't speak much during the drive. At one point, Sophia said, If Victor's attorneys try to get to Wells before we arrive, they can't, Adrian said. The case is formally open. Any approach from Romano's legal team goes on record as contact with an active investigation. She nodded. A few minutes later, she said, Daniel is still... I checked at 7:30, Adrian said. He's fine. He had breakfast and he watched a nature program about birds. She looked out the window. He loves birds, she said. I know, Adrian said. Magdalena told me. She looked him up after you made the call. A pause. She said he has 11 species memorized by call. Sophia turned her head to look at him. There were tears in her eyes. Not falling just present the kind that arrive when something safe is mentioned in the middle of something that has been very unsafe for a very long time. She didn't have to do that, Sophia said. No, Adrian said. She didn't. Sophia looked back at the window. She's a remarkable woman, she said. She's been with my family since before I was born, Adrian said. She knew my father. She knew the restaurant. He paused. She was the one who pushed me in the early months after the fire to not make a decision out of grief that I couldn't undo. Did you listen? Not entirely, he said. You took me, she said. Yes, he said. That was the grief talking. She was quiet. And now, she said. Now I'm trying to hear something else, he said. She looked at him. He looked at the road. What are you hearing? She said. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive thinking. That the right move and the revenge move are not the same move, he said. That I've been confusing them for 3 years, and that the difference between them only became clear when I had someone in the room who could show me the distinction. She understood what he was saying. She understood what he wasn't saying, too. Adrian, she said. You don't have to, he started. I'm not going to say anything you're afraid of, she said. I'm just going to say this. She waited until he looked at her briefly. Whatever you started this as the reason you had me brought to your house, I need you to know that what it became was something I didn't expect. And I have spent 4 years expecting nothing from anyone. So that is not a small thing to say. He looked at her for a moment longer than the road safely allowed. No, he said. It isn't. Wells met them in the lobby. He was a compact man in his mid-50s, with the particular kind of directness that came from 2 decades of looking at people who were trying to hide things and deciding who was and who wasn't. He looked at Sophia for a long moment when Adrian introduced them. Mrs. Romano, he said. Ms. Andreu, she said. Her mother's name, her name before Victor. Wells registered that without commentary. Paulo Reyes is still in the conference room, he said. He's been remarkable. The documentation he brought is, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have rarely seen an internal case built this cleanly. He paused. I want to ask you some questions about the period from 4 years ago through the present. Your direct observations, your knowledge of the operation, and specifically the events of the past 72 hours. I'll answer everything, Sophia said. I have been waiting a long time to answer everything. He nodded. There's one other thing, Wells said. He looked between Sophia and Adrian carefully. Victor Romano's attorney filed a harassment and coercion allegation at 7:29 this morning. You're aware of that? Yes, Adrian said. I want both of you to know that I have reviewed the filing and cross-referenced it against the documented timeline of this investigation, Wells said. The filing is reactive. It arrives 14 minutes after a formal investigation was opened, naming its primary subject. Under federal procedure, that classification changes the weight assigned to the filing significantly. He paused. I'm telling you this not to reassure you, but because I want you to understand that what you're doing here today is the correct next step, and that the system, when people bring it evidence, rather than waiting for it to stumble across evidence on its own, the system is capable of working correctly. Sophia absorbed that. You've been waiting for someone to bring you what we brought, she said. I've been trying to build this case through external observation for 3 years, Wells said. The internal documentation Paulo provided and what you're about to give me from your direct experience changes the nature of what I can do and how fast I can do it. He looked at her directly. You built something in that house, he said. In very difficult circumstances. I want you to know I understand that. Sophia nodded. One small, clean nod. Let's go in, she said. The statement took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Adrian waited in a room down the hall, not pacing, sitting, thinking. He did the kind of thinking that could only happen when the immediate pressure lifted slightly and there was enough quiet to let the larger questions surface. He thought about his father. He thought about the restaurant and the fire and the 2 people inside, and the fact that those people had been killed not as a message in a real war, but as a manipulation in a manufactured one. That the grief he'd been carrying for 3 years had been designed for him. That Victor had killed people and then pointed the surviving mourner at someone else and watched the mourner run in the wrong direction for 3 years. He thought about who he had become in those 3 years, what he'd let the grief build. He had not been a good man. He had been an effective man, a controlled man, a man who accomplished what he set out to accomplish and protected the people he was responsible for. But good was different from effective, and he had known that distinction once before the fire and had lost it afterward. He wondered if it was something you could find again. He thought it might be. He thought it might be something you built slowly in decisions made differently than the decisions before them in choosing the right move over the revenge move, until the distinction became less conscious and more simply who you were. He thought about a woman who had done exactly that for 4 years in a house where it cost her something real every single day. He thought about what she'd said in the car, that what this became was something she didn't expect. He sat with that for a long time. Marco appeared in the doorway at 12:40. "She's done," he said. "Wells," Adrian said. "Still in there," Marco said. "But he let her go," he said. Marco paused with the expression of someone relaying something they personally found significant. He said he'd never taken a 2-hour, 40-minute statement that answered every question before he asked it. Adrian stood up. He went into the hallway. Sophia was coming toward him from the conference room. She looked tired in a way that was different from the tired of the past 2 days, not depleted, but released. The tired of a person who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has just finally breathed out. She stopped in front of him. "He's going to move fast," she said. "He said he expects to be in front of a judge for emergency asset freezing by end of week." "Good," Adrian said. "Victor will fight it," she said. "He'll fight it with the legal team working against an active federal investigation, and an internal witness, and a 4-year documentation chain," Adrian said. "He can fight. It won't help him." She nodded. "Paolo's okay," she said. "Paolo's in the cafeteria drinking his 5th coffee," Marco said from behind Adrian. "He looks like a man who has just been told his prison sentence was suspended." She closed her eyes briefly. "Good," she said. "Good." She opened her eyes. She looked at Adrian, and something passed between them in the hallway of a federal building at 12:42 in the afternoon. Something that didn't have a precise name yet, but had weight and direction, and the particular quality of something that was only beginning. "What do we do now?" she said. It was a simple question with a large answer. "We go home," he said. She looked at him. "You're home," she said. "For now," he said. "Until you decide what comes next." "I haven't thought about what comes next," she said. "I've spent 4 years thinking about today." "Then today gets to be enough," he said. "For a while." She looked at him for a long moment. "What about you?" she said. "What comes next for you?" He thought about it honestly. "I have a business to restructure," he said. "Operations that were built around a war that no longer exists. People who have been fighting for 12 years who are going to need to understand that the fighting is finished." He paused. "And I have 3 years of decisions to look back at and learn from." "That sounds like a long project," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm good at long projects," she said. He looked at her. "I know," he said. She almost said something else. She decided not to. Not yet. Not in a federal hallway with Marco 6 feet behind them, and the afternoon still moving, and too much still processing to put words on something that deserved more space than this. Instead, she said, "I want to call Daniel." "We'll stop on the way back," he said. "Somewhere quiet. Take as long as you need." She nodded. They walked out together. The afternoon was bright and ordinary and entirely unaware of what had just happened inside the building behind them. People moved past on the sidewalk, going about their days. Traffic moved. The city ran on the same engine it always ran on, indifferent to the specific gravity of specific moments. Sophia Romano Andreou walked into that ordinary afternoon and tilted her face up toward the light for exactly 2 seconds. Just that. 2 seconds, eyes closed like a person confirming that the warmth is real. Adrian watched her. He thought about a woman who had sat in a house with a dangerous man for 4 years and kept something alive inside herself that men like Victor thought they could extinguish. He thought about what that required. He thought about what it said about who she was. He thought about the fact that 3 days ago he had brought her to his house as a piece of revenge, and that the most accurate thing he could say about the present moment was that he was standing next to the most remarkable person he'd met in a very long time, in an ordinary afternoon that felt more real than anything had felt in 3 years. He wasn't going to say any of that, not today. But he was going to remember the 2 seconds she tilted her face to the light, the way you remember the specific moment when something shifts in a direction you didn't plan for, and realize with something that feels very close to gratitude that it shifted exactly right. The call to Daniel lasted 47 minutes. They stopped at a small park 3 blocks from the Federal Building. Marco pulled over without being asked, which said something about how well he read rooms after 15 years, and Sophia sat in the back seat with the door open and called her brother, while Adrian stood outside and gave her the distance that mattered. He could hear fragments of it. Not the words, just the music of it. Her voice going through registers he hadn't heard before, lighter and fuller, and without any of the careful management she carried everywhere else. He heard her laugh twice. Real laughter, the kind that isn't performed for anyone. He heard her voice crack once briefly, and then steady, and he recognized that crack for what it was, the specific fracture point of relief when it finally arrives after being deferred for too long. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at nothing, and thought about a young man named Daniel, who had spent 4 years being unknowingly protected by his sister at a cost she never allowed him to see. He thought about what it meant to love someone that completely and that quietly. He thought about his own father, about the years before the fire when protection had looked different, louder, more visible, built from position and strength and the understood language of their world. He had never thought of his father's protection as something that cost the protector. He had thought of it as something his father simply was. He understood now that it cost, that it always cost. That the people who loved you most were the ones quietly paying a price you never saw the invoice for. Marco leaned against the front of the car and said nothing. He was good at saying nothing in ways that were useful. Sophia came out of the car at 1:37. Her eyes were clear. She'd cried somewhere in the 47 minutes and handled it privately, and now she looked like a woman who had put down something she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it had a shape. "He wants to meet you," she said. Adrian looked at her. "Daniel," she said. I told him there was someone who helped. He said he wants to meet the person who helped his sister." She paused. "I didn't give him details. He doesn't need the details. But he asked, and I couldn't." "Tell him yes," Adrian said. She looked at him. "You don't have to," she started. "Tell him yes," he said again. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. They got back in the car, and the city moved around them the same way it always had, the same way cities always do, indifferent to the specific gravity of the people moving through them, while Adrian Valenti sat in the back of a car heading home, and understood with the clean clarity of something finally settled, that the man he was becoming was different from the man he'd been 4 days ago. Victor Romano's asset freeze came through on Thursday. Wells moved faster than he'd projected, not 48 hours, but 31, which Adrian read as a signal about how complete the documentation was and how quickly it had been independently verified. The freeze covered 47 accounts across 9 financial institutions in 4 countries. It covered the Romano Holdings shell structure that Paolo's records had mapped across 11 years. It covered the Cayman account that had been the original financial engine of a manufactured war. Marco brought Adrian the alert at 6:15 in the morning. Adrian read it twice. Then he set it down and poured coffee and sat at his kitchen table alone and thought about what 47 frozen accounts meant for a man who had spent 12 years believing his position was untouchable. It meant the walls had come down, not with a confrontation, not with the kind of direct violence that Adrian had spent 3 years imagining and building toward, with paper, with 11 years of financial records organized by a frightened bookkeeper who decided his conscience was worth more than his salary, with a 4-year case assembled in silence by a woman who had understood that the most powerful weapon available to her was the one that left no bruise and required no explosion. He thought about how differently this had ended from how he had planned it to end. He had imagined something direct, something final, Something that looked like the resolution of a war in the language wars spoke. He had imagined standing across from Victor Romano in some conclusive moment and making clear what the cost of what Victor had done was. He hadn't imagined federal agents and asset freezes and a conference room where a woman gave a 2-hour 40-minute statement that answered every question before it was asked. He wasn't sure this was better. He was sure it was right. Those were different things, and he was learning to tell them apart. Sophia came down at 7. She looked at his face when she walked in, the way she'd learned to read it in the past 4 days, and she said, "The freeze." "Yes," he said. She sat down across from him. "How do you feel?" she said. He thought about it honestly. She'd earned honesty. "Quieter than I expected," he said. "I've been building towards something for 3 years. Now it's happened and I feel quiet, like the engine stopped." "That's normal," she said. "The engine has been running at a certain pitch for so long that when it stops, the silence is louder than the noise was." "How long does that last?" he said. "I'll let you know when mine stops," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. "Thank you," he said. "For what specifically?" she said. "For not letting me use you as a piece," he said. "For walking into my study that first morning and telling me I'd made a mistake. For being the version of yourself you are, instead of the version Victor spent 4 years trying to make you into." She was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't always that version," she said. "In the first year with Victor, She stopped. "I was smaller than I am now. He was very good at making people smaller. You don't notice it happening. You just notice one day that you're not taking up the space you used to." "What changed?" he said. "Daniel," she said. "I visited him one afternoon in the second year, and he showed me this bird, a red-tailed hawk. He'd been watching it from his window for a week, and he was so delighted by it. So completely openly delighted. And I realized that Victor had never once in 2 years made me feel the way my brother felt watching a bird." She paused. "That's when I started building the case, not out of anger. Out of the decision that Daniel's way of being in the world deserved to survive, and the thing threatening it needed to end." Adrian looked at her. "A red-tailed hawk," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's what started it." "That's what started it," she confirmed. He picked up his coffee. "I want to meet him," he said. "Not because you said he wants to meet me, because I want to." She looked at him carefully. "He'll ask you questions," she said. "He's very direct. He doesn't have any of the social, he'll just ask you directly what he wants to know." "Good," Adrian said. "He might ask why you have such a big house," she said. "He asked me that yesterday. He said, 'How many people live there?' And I said, 'Not many,' and he said, 'That seems lonely.'" Adrian was quiet for a moment. It does, he thought. It does seem lonely. "Tell him I said he's right," he said. She looked at him with something that was past assessment and strategy and careful management and was simply directly whatever it actually was. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll tell him." The news broke publicly on Friday morning. Not through a leak through the federal process itself, which at a certain stage becomes visible to press, who know where to look. By 9 o'clock, there were 3 journalists on the story. By 11, there were 14. By 1 in the afternoon, Victor Romano's name was on every financial news platform in the country, alongside words like alleged fraud, federal investigation, asset freeze, and multi-decade scheme. The Romano family's public relations infrastructure moved immediately. Statements, denials, carefully worded non-answers about cooperating with all legitimate inquiries while reserving the right to contest any claims. It was a very good public relations infrastructure. It didn't matter, because the story wasn't built on allegations, it was built on documentation, on account numbers that matched banking records that had been independently verified before the first journalist typed the first word, on an 11-year internal paper trail that existed whether or not anyone chose to believe it. Sophia watched the news on a phone at the kitchen table and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "He's going to give an interview." "Victor," Adrian said. "He always gives an interview when he's cornered, she said. He'll find the right outlet, something that looks credible enough to function as a venue, but sympathetic enough to give him the questions he can answer well. He'll be measured and calm and deeply wronged, and he'll suggest that the people behind this have their own motivations for wanting to damage him. He'll name you, Adrian said. He'll name me and imply that a disgruntled, estranged wife fabricated a narrative for personal reasons, she said. He won't say it directly. He'll let the audience draw the conclusion. She set the phone down. It's what he's best at, building implications. And the documentation, Adrian said. He'll say it's been misinterpreted, she said. He'll say the account structures were legitimate business vehicles, and that politically motivated investigators are applying a retroactive framework. She stopped herself. It will sound plausible to people who want it to sound plausible. It always does. But it won't change the investigation, Adrian said. No, she said. It won't change the investigation. Wells is 20 years past the point where a sympathetic interview changes an investigation. She paused. I'm just telling you what's coming so it doesn't look like movement when it isn't. You're managing my expectations, he said. I'm managing the information environment, she said. There's a difference. He looked at her. Sophia, he said. What? You don't have to manage me, he said. You can just say what you're thinking. She looked at him. I'm thinking that Victor is going to spend the next 3 months making me look like a manipulative woman who destroyed her marriage and framed her husband out of spite, she said. And I'm thinking that some percentage of people who hear that narrative will believe it, and I will have to walk around in the world knowing that they believe it. And, he said, and I've been walking around for 4 years knowing people believe things about me that weren't true, she said. I know how to do that. She stopped. I don't want to have to again. I did the right thing. Paolo did the right thing. I would like just once for doing the right thing to not require an additional performance of surviving other people's false conclusions. He was quiet. Then he said, Nico is going on record. She looked at him. He called me this morning, Adrian said. He wants to give a statement, not legal, not to Wells, to the press, a direct account of 12 years of manufactured conflict and what it cost the Valenti family and why he believes the documentation is accurate. Nico goes public, she started. Nico going public shifts the narrative, Adrian said. Victor's version requires that this is a bitter wife and a vengeful family with a grudge. Nico on record with the timeline and the personal losses makes it something different. Makes it a family that was deliberately targeted and is now describing what that looks like from the inside. Victor will attack Nico, she said. Victor can try, Adrian said. But Nico has documentation too. And Nico is very good in front of cameras in ways that are difficult to predict if you've only read about him. She absorbed this. You're not going on record yourself, she said. It wasn't a question. Not yet, he said. The investigation doesn't need me on record yet, and me on record creates more questions than Nico does. But I'm building a timeline, a complete account. Everything I know, everything I can document, everything from the night of the restaurant fire through to yesterday morning. For Wells, he said, and for after. When this is in front of a judge and Victor's defense team tries to construct the narrative they've been preparing. You're thinking about the trial, she said. I'm thinking about every stage after today, he said. Because we're not finished. We won the first part. The rest of this takes months. She looked at him. You said we, she said. He paused. Yes, he said. I did. She didn't say anything for a moment. Adrian, she said. Yes. I need to find somewhere to live, she said. I can't stay here indefinitely. I don't have when I left Victor's house, I had what I was wearing. I don't have money that isn't entangled with the Romano assets which are frozen. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to. I know you're not asking, he said. I'm telling you that there's time. The freeze will be partially lifted for personal accounts. Within 30 days, Paolo's legal team has already filed for your individual accounts to be separated from the Romano corporate structure. And in the meantime, he paused. In the meantime, this house has 12 rooms and 5 of them are empty, and Magdalena makes enough food for 20 people every morning regardless of how many are here." She looked at him. "That's a very practical argument," she said. "I'm a practical person," he said. "You're many things," she said. "Practical is one of the more recent ones." He almost smiled. This time he let it happen. She watched it happen, and something in her expression went soft at the edges in a way that she didn't try to manage. "Okay," she said. "For now." "For now," he agreed. Victor gave the interview on Saturday. It was exactly as Sophia had predicted. A measured, calm, deeply wronged man in a well-lit room with a sympathetic host who handed him questions shaped like opportunities. He was articulate about the complexity of long business careers. He was measured about the pain of a marriage that had broken down and the difficulty of navigating that breakdown while also being the subject of what he described as a politically motivated federal action. He didn't name Sophia directly. He said, "The people closest to a man in a difficult moment are not always the people who wish him well." He said, "I've spent 30 years building something. I understand that builds enemies." He said, "I look forward to the truth coming out through the appropriate process." He was very good. Sophia watched it once all the way through without expression. When it finished, she said, "He's afraid." "He looked composed," Marco said. He had watched it with them, which was a sign of how the past week had blurred certain lines. "He's always composed when he's afraid," Sophia said. "When he's comfortable, he's expansive. He takes up space. He tells stories. He makes the room his." She looked at the blank screen. That man in that interview was taking up exactly as much space as the chair he was sitting in. He was contained, controlled. She paused. "He's afraid." Adrian said, "Good." She looked at him. "Not good because he's suffering," he said. "Good because afraid people make mistakes. And we are still in the period where a mistake from Victor helps Wells." "What kind of mistake?" Marco said. "Contact with a witness," Sophia said immediately. "He won't do it directly. He'll use intermediaries. But if he tries to reach Paolo or Celeste Fang or anyone whose name is in the federal file, obstruction," Marco said. "Documented obstruction," she said, "on top of everything else." "Is he likely to try?" Adrian said. "He's going to try to reach Celeste," she said. "She's the piece he doesn't understand yet. He doesn't know that she chose correctly 3 nights ago. He thinks she's a loyal employee who happened to have a server failure. When he finds out she made a choice..." She stopped. "He's going to be very angry. Angry enough to make the kind of contact that shows up in federal records," Adrian said. "Angry enough to pick up a phone without thinking it through," she said. "Yes." They waited. Victor called Celeste Fang on Sunday afternoon. He called from a number that had been laundered through 2 forwarding services, which was careful, but not careful enough, not when Wells's team had been watching every communication node connected to Victor's known network since Thursday morning. The call lasted 6 minutes. Victor did not threaten Celeste directly. He asked questions about the archive, about the server failure, about whether anyone had accessed her personal contact information recently. He was calm and reasonable, the same performance he'd given the interviewer. Celeste Fang said, "I don't think we should be talking." Victor said, "Celeste, we've worked together for 11 years." Celeste said, "I know, I have to go." She hung up. She then called the number that Marco had given her 3 days earlier and said in a voice that was steady in the way of someone who had made up their mind and was living with it. He called, "I'm going to need to speak with someone official." Marco relayed this to Adrian at 4:17 Sunday afternoon. Adrian was in the middle of a conversation with Sophia about something that had nothing to do with Victor or federal investigations. She had been telling him about the time Daniel had memorized an entire field guide to Pacific Coast birds, and then recited it unprompted to a park ranger who had not expected this. And he stopped, read the message and said, "Celeste Fang just handed Wells the obstruction." Sophia stopped talking. "He called her," she said. Sunday afternoon, Adrian said. After the interview. After 48 hours of being contained and controlled in front of cameras. He couldn't help it, she said. No, he said. That's the thing about Victor, she said. He's very disciplined until the moment he decides someone he trusted has turned. Then the discipline goes. She looked at the phone in Adrian's hand. Celeste was someone he trusted completely. Someone he believed was simply doing her job. The moment it started to occur to him that she might have made a choice. He picked up the phone, Adrian said. He always picks up the phone, she said. I've watched him do it 4 times in 4 years. Someone he trusted showed a sign of independent decision-making, and he picked up the phone and called them personally to remind them who they were loyal to. She paused. It works on people who are still afraid of him. Celeste isn't afraid of him anymore. She has a reason not to be, Adrian said. She made the choice, Sophia said. Once you make the choice, the fear changes. It doesn't disappear, but it changes direction. It starts pointing at the consequences of going back instead of the consequences of going forward. He looked at her. That's from experience, he said. Everything I say about fear is from experience, she said. Wells called Adrian on Monday morning, not through intermediaries, directly. His personal line, which Adrian had not given him, which meant Wells had found it himself, which was a statement about the current level of federal attention being applied to everything connected to this case. We have the obstruction contact documented, Wells said without preamble. Celeste Fang gave a voluntary statement Sunday evening. Combined with the asset freeze, the internal documentation, Paolo's testimony, and Ms. Andreu's statement, I have everything I need to recommend formal charges. Timeline, Adrian said. Grand jury presentation by end of this week, Wells said. If they indict, and I expect them to indict, Victor Romano will be looking at arraignment within 30 days. Adrian sat with that. The preemptive filing, he said, the one naming me and Sophia, has been referred to a separate review for potential counterfiling, Wells said. The timing, the content, and the subsequent obstruction contact make a strong case that the filing itself was part of an ongoing pattern. It's being handled. Thank you, Adrian said. Mr. Valenti, Wells said, I want to say something outside the official capacity. Say it, Adrian said. This case exists because 2 people took personal risk to bring documentation to someone who could act on it, Wells said. Paolo Reyes spent 8 months copying records in a building where being caught would have ended him. Ms. Andreu spent 4 years building a case under conditions that most people wouldn't have survived with their reasoning intact. A pause. I've been trying to build this case for 3 years from the outside. What they brought me in 72 hours was what I couldn't build in 3 years. I want you to know I understand what that cost. Adrian was quiet for a moment. I'll tell them, he said. He told Sophia at 9:15 when she came downstairs. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Grand jury. End of week, Adrian said. Arraignment within 30 days, she said. If they indict. They'll indict, she said. Wells doesn't present to a grand jury without being certain. She sat down. She looked at the kitchen table. The same table where she'd been sitting when all of this began. Where Paolo had organized his files, where she'd written the 7-line message that bought them the hours they needed. It's real, she said, not a question. The statement of a person confirming something they've expected for so long that its arrival requires a moment of verification. It's real, Adrian said. She put her hands flat on the table. He watched her. 4 years, she said. Yes, he said. I need to tell Daniel, she said. Not the details. But he needs to know that whatever was making me worried for a long time is finished. He knows something has been wrong. He's never asked directly, but he knows. He's more perceptive than people expect. Call him, Adrian said. I will. She didn't move immediately. Adrian. Yes. What Wells said about what it cost. She looked up at him. He's right that it costs something, but I want to be clear that the accounting on that goes both ways. She paused, choosing her words with the care she brought to everything important. You gave Paolo protection when you didn't have to. You called the facility at 6 in the morning on the first day. You stood outside while I talked to Daniel and gave me 47 minutes without once making me feel like the clock was running. She met his eyes. Those things cost something too. They're a different kind of cost. But they're real. He looked at her. You don't have to, he started. I know I don't have to, she said. That's why I'm saying it. She paused. I've been in rooms for 4 years with a man who needed everything acknowledged and nothing reciprocated. I'm saying this because I choose to, because it's true and you deserve to hear it. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said. He meant it the same way she'd meant it the first morning when it was just 2 words with years behind them. She nodded. She picked up the phone to call Daniel. Chol. The grand jury convened on Thursday. Adrian knew about it the same way he knew about most things, not from official channels, but from the network of careful attentiveness that 15 years of operating in a complex world had built around him. He knew the presenting attorney's name. He knew the scheduled time. He knew by Thursday afternoon that the session had lasted longer than standard, which Wells's office later confirmed was a sign of thorough questioning rather than doubt. He told Sophia at 6 Thursday evening. She was reading an actual book, something she'd found in his library that she'd been working through for 2 days, which he had noticed and said nothing about, because it seemed like the kind of small reclamation of ordinary life that deserved to happen without commentary. She put the book down. How long for a decision? She said. Wells said possibly tomorrow, he said. Definitely by end of week. She nodded. Nico called, she said. He looked at her. He called to talk to me, she said. Specifically me. He had questions about the early part of the timeline, the original manufactured conflict, the documents from 12 years ago. He's writing something. A personal account, he said. Not for press. For himself. For his brother, Adrian said. She looked at him. For his brother, she said. Yes, I think so. She picked up the book again, then put it down again. He's a good man, she said. Nico, different from you, louder, more surface. But underneath it, he's always been the better man, Adrian said. She looked at him sharply. Don't do that, she said. Do what? Minimize yourself in comparison to someone else, she said. Nico is good in the ways Nico is good. You are good in the ways you are good. They're not the same ways, and they don't need to be ranked. He was quiet. You've been doing it since the investigation opened, she said. Saying things like, the grief was making me wrong, and I became the man I hated, and framing every decision from the past 3 years as evidence of failure. She set the book on the table. You made hard decisions in a context that was built on a lie. You were pointed in the wrong direction by someone who was very good at pointing people in wrong directions. That is not the same as being a bad man. I brought you here against your will, he said. Yes, she said. And then you sat down instead of standing over me, and then you asked me what I needed, and then you called my brother's facility at 6 in the morning. She looked at him steadily. The man who brought me here, and the man who called that facility in the same morning, that's the same man learning which version of himself he wants to be. She paused. That's not failure. That's the only real thing any of us can do. He looked at her for a long time. When did you figure that out? He said. Sitting in Victor's house in year 2, she said. When I realized I had a choice between letting what was happening to me define who I was, or deciding who I was going to be in spite of it. She paused. It's easier to choose the second thing when you have a reason. Daniel was my reason. And now, he said. Now I have more than one reason, she said. She said it simply without performance. Looking at him the same way she looked at everything that mattered directly fully without the management she applied to everything that needed protection. He understood exactly what she meant. He didn't say everything he could have said. The timing wasn't right for everything. But he said, "So do I." She looked at him. Then she picked up her book. But she was almost smiling. The indictment came Friday at 2:17 in the afternoon. 18 counts. Federal fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. The legal architecture of 12 years of manufactured conflict and 4 years of cover-up assembled into a formal document that now existed in the federal record in a way that could not be erased, bought, or managed. Victor Romano surrendered to federal custody at 4 o'clock. Marco brought the news to Adrian and Sofia together. He walked in, looked at both of them, and said, 18 counts. He's in custody. The room was quiet for a moment. Sofia was very still. Then she said, Paolo. Already told, Marco said. He cried again. Different kind this time. She nodded. Celeste, she said. Her attorney released a statement, Marco said. She's cooperating fully with the investigation. She thanks the people who gave her the opportunity to make the right choice. He paused. Those are her words. The opportunity to make the right choice. Sofia closed her eyes. One breath. She opened them. She looked at Adrian. He looked back. There was no performance in the room, no strategy, no management of information or outcomes or other people's reactions. Just two people sitting with the full weight of what had just happened and the full strangeness of being the people it had happened to. It's done, she said. It started, he said, echoing her from 4 days ago. The trial will take time. I know, she said, but the part that required us to be afraid is done. He nodded. She was right about that. What do you want to do? He said. She thought about it. I want to call Daniel, she said. And then I want to eat something that isn't a working meal. And then I want to sleep for approximately 11 hours. All of that is available, he said. She looked at him. And after that, she said. After that, he said, we figure out what after that looks like. She studied him. That's an open answer, she said. It's an open question, he said. She was quiet. Then she said, I'm going to want to work on rebuilding the community center. The one Victor's operation damaged 3 years ago. There are families who lost access to resources they depended on. I've been thinking about it since before any of this happened, what it would take to restore it. Not as a Romano project, as something separate, something mine. Yes, he said. I have ideas about the funding structure, she said, about how to build it in a way that can't be compromised the same way again. I want to hear them, he said. She looked at him. Some of it will require access to resources that are currently frozen, she said. My personal accounts should clear within the month. Sofia, he said. What? Whatever the community center needs, he said. It has. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to. I know, he said. That's why I'm saying it. She recognized her own words coming back. She almost laughed, the real kind, brief and surprised. You've been paying attention, she said. I've been paying a great deal of attention, he said. She looked at him with everything that had been building and shifting and finding its shape over 6 days through files and federal calls and an 11-year paper trail and 47 minutes on the phone with a young man who loved birds and a 2-second moment of sunlight outside a federal building, and conversations at a kitchen table in the middle of the night that neither of them had planned for, but both of them had needed. I'm going to call Daniel, she said. Go, he said. She stood. She stopped at the door. Adrian, she said. He looked at her. When I walked into your study 6 days ago and told you that you'd made a mistake. She paused. I was right. You had. She held his gaze. But what you did with the mistake, what you chose to become inside it, that's the thing that matters, not the mistake. She left. He sat with that in the quiet of the room. He thought about 3 years of building toward a revenge that had ended not in destruction, but in documentation. A war that had ended not in a confrontation, but in a conference room. A plan that had ended not with what he'd intended, but with something that was in every way that counted more complete. He thought about his father, about what his father would have said looking at this week from wherever it was that fathers watched from. He thought his father would have said, "This is better. This is harder and slower and less satisfying in the moment, and this is better." He thought his father would have been right. Nico called at 4:45. "Tell me you're watching the news," Nico said. "I don't need to watch the news," Adrian said. "I know what happened." 18 counts, Nico said. "I know," Adrian said. "He's in custody," Nico said. "I know." A pause. "We're okay," Nico said. It wasn't a question. It was the thing you say when something you've been bracing against for a long time has finally resolved, and you need to hear confirmation from the person you trust most. "We're okay," Adrian said. "And her," Nico said. "She's calling her brother," Adrian said. "Good," Nico said. "That's good." He paused. "She's remarkable, Adrian." "Yes," he said. "She is. Are you going to be stupid about it?" Nico. "Because I'm asking as someone who has watched you be occasionally stupid about things that mattered," Nico said. "Not often, but occasionally." "I'm not going to be stupid about it," Adrian said. "Good," Nico said, "because she is genuinely remarkable, and you are in a position where being stupid about it would be the stupidest thing you've ever done, which is a high bar given some of your historical decisions." "Goodbye, Nico," Adrian said. "I'm coming for dinner Sunday," Nico said. "I want to see how she takes her coffee." He hung up. Adrian put the phone down. He heard Sophia's voice from another room, the lighter register, the fuller sound, the version of her that existed when she was talking to Daniel. He heard her laugh, the real kind. He thought about 12 rooms, and 5 of them empty, and a woman who organized files with a logic that was immediately clear, and who had built a 4-year case against her own husband from inside his house, and who had sat at his kitchen table at 2 a.m. and told him the truth about his grief with more precision and courage than anyone had managed in 3 years. He thought about what it meant that she was still in this house. He thought about what it meant that he wanted her to stay. He thought about the community center and the families who had lost access to something they depended on, and a woman who had been thinking about rebuilding it since before any of this happened, who had carried that intention through 4 years of surviving something that would have broken most people and had come out the other side with the intention still intact. He thought about what kind of man chose to stand next to that. He decided he wanted to be that man. Not because of what she was to his plans or his future or the structural reconstruction of a business built around a war that was now over. Not because she was useful or strategic or positioned correctly in relation to what came next. Because of who she was. Because of a red-tailed hawk and a field guide memorized cover to cover and 47 minutes in a parked car and 2 seconds of sunlight, and the way she said things that were true without softening them, and the way she'd looked at him in that federal hallway when something passed between them that didn't have a name yet, but had been there undeniably building quietly in the space between everything else. Because the man he was becoming looked like someone who deserved to stand next to her. And because for the first time in 3 years, the man he was becoming was someone he recognized. When Sophia came back into the room 20 minutes later, she looked at him the way she'd been learning to look at him, without the management, without the careful distance, with the directness she reserved for things that mattered. "He's happy," she said. "Daniel. He said to tell the person who helped his sister that he would like to show you the hawk window when you visit." Adrian looked at her. "Tell him I'll be there," he said. She smiled. Not almost, not close, completely. And Adrian Valenti, who had begun this week with a plan built from grief and revenge and 3 years of misdirected certainty, understood in that moment that the thing he'd been reaching for across 12 years of manufactured war and 3 years of real grief and 6 days of the most consequential week of his life. The thing he'd never found in the language of power or position or carefully executed strategy was standing in front of him in his own kitchen, smiling the kind of smile that belonged to someone who had survived the worst and come through it completely themselves. He hadn't taken Victor Romano's wife as revenge. He had found in the woman his enemy was most afraid of the reason to become the man he'd always been capable of being. And that was not a story about revenge. That was a story about what remains after the war ends, when the noise stops and the grief changes and the engine falls quiet, and you finally in the silence hear what you were always supposed to be moving toward.